A year after my wife Vivian passed away, I finally found the courage to open her old bedroom. I hired a repairman to fix what I thought was a simple hidden water leak behind the drywall. I was just pulling into the church parking lot when my phone rang. The repairman sounded terrified. His voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand him. He said, "Cal, go home right now, but go alone. Do not tell your son. Do not tell your daughter-in-law. Just get here." When I walked back into that room and saw what was waiting for me behind the plaster, I realized my entire life was a lie. My name is Calvin. I am 71 years old, and for 35 years I worked as a forensic auditor for the IRS in Chicago. I spent my life hunting down hidden assets, exposing frauds, and breaking down complex lies. But I never realized the biggest fraud of all was living under my own roof. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my own family piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe the truth always comes to light no matter how deep you bury it. I turned my car around immediately. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. Trey was not a man who panicked easily. He was a 40-year-old contractor, a family friend who had fixed our pipes and wired our lights for over a decade. He was a solid, practical man. For him to sound that scared something was terribly wrong. I sped back to the house. It was a large, beautiful home in the suburbs that Vivian and I had paid off entirely. After she died of a sudden illness last year, the house felt too big and too quiet. That was when my son Derek suggested he and his wife Chloe move in. Derek is 38, a supposedly successful investment fund manager. Chloe is 34, a white woman who runs some tech startup. They moved in under the guise of taking care of me in my grief. Chloe always played the part of the modern, caring daughter-in-law, cooking organic meals and making sure I took my medications. I thought I was blessed. I thought I had a family that loved me. I parked on the street to avoid making noise and hurried to the front door. The house was dead silent. I walked straight down the hallway to the back of the house where Vivian used to have her sewing room. It was the room she spent her last months in when she was too weak to climb the stairs. Trey was standing in the middle of the room. His face was ashen. He was holding a crowbar, but it was hanging loosely by his side. He pointed to the far wall. "I told you there was a leak because of the water stains on the baseboard," Trey said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But when I pulled the baseboard away and tapped the drywall, it just caved in. Someone already broke it open, Cal." I stepped closer to the wall. My 35 years of forensic training kicked in instantly. I did not look at the hole with emotion. I looked at it as a crime scene. The drywall was not water damaged, it was smashed. But the edges of the plaster were pushed outward into Vivian's room. That meant the force came from the opposite side. The wall was shared with the master bedroom, the room where Derek and Chloe slept. Someone had taken a hammer and smashed through their own closet wall to reach into the cavity behind Vivian's wall. Why would Derek or Chloe smash a hole into my dead wife's room? I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Trey shook his head. He shined his heavy-duty flashlight into the dark gap between the wooden studs. "They were looking for something," Trey said, "and they were in a rush. Look down there, to the left, deep in the corner." I got down on my knees. My joints ached, but the adrenaline masked the pain. I grabbed the flashlight from Trey and angled the beam into the dusty, insulation-filled cavity. Hidden way back in the corner, completely covered in decades of dust and drywall debris, was a small, dark iron lockbox. Whoever had smashed through the wall from the other side had blindly reached in, probably grabbing whatever was directly in front of the hole. In their frantic hurry, they missed the heavy little box shoved tight against the bottom beam. I reached my arm into the jagged hole. The broken drywall scraped my skin, but I managed to hook my fingers around the cold metal handle. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, fireproof box. It was covered in dust, but there was a small combination lock on the front. I stared at it. Vivian always used the same 4 numbers for everything. The year we got married, 1976. I spun the small metal dials to 1976. The lock clicked and popped open. My heart pounded against my ribs. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on top of a faded piece of velvet, was a thick leather-bound diary. I recognized it immediately. It was the journal Vivian kept during the last year of her life, the one she told me she had lost. Tucked right next to the diary was a small black USB drive. I felt the air get sucked out of the room. Vivian had intentionally hidden this box inside the wall cavity. She had unscrewed the baseboard, dropped the box down between the studs, and sealed it back up. My wife was hiding something in her own house, but hiding it from who? From me, or from the people sleeping in the next room. I looked up at Trey. He was watching me with wide eyes. "You need to plug that in," Cal, Trey whispered. "You need to see what is on it right now." I stood up, clutching the box to my chest. My mind was racing. If Derek and Chloe had smashed through the wall, what did they take? What were they looking for? And did they know this box was still here? I walked over to the small desk in the corner where I kept my laptop. I opened the screen and waited for it to boot up. My hands were shaking. I was a man who spent his life dismantling the financial webs of corrupt politicians and corporate embezzlers. I was trained to remain completely devoid of emotion when uncovering a crime. But standing in my late wife's room holding a secret she took to her grave, I felt a profound sense of dread that no training could suppress. I took the small black USB drive and inserted it into the side of the laptop. A folder popped up on the screen. There was only one file inside. It was a video file simply named with the date of Vivian's death. I moved my mouse to double-click the file. I needed to know the truth. But before my finger could press the button, a sound froze the blood in my veins. It was the distinct crunch of heavy tires rolling onto the gravel of our driveway. I rushed to the window and peered through the blinds. A sleek silver Mercedes-Benz had just pulled up. It was Chloe. She was supposed to be at her tech startup office all afternoon, but she was home early. She stepped out of the car carrying her designer bag, looking annoyed as she typed furiously on her phone. Panic seized me. If Chloe walked into the house and saw Trey here, she would know we found the hole in the wall. If she knew we found the hole, she would know we found the box. The element of surprise was the only advantage I had. I slammed the laptop shut and shoved the USB drive deep into my pocket. I grabbed the leather diary and tucked it into the back of my trousers, pulling my sweater down to hide it. I turned to Trey. His eyes were darting from the window to the door. "Grab your tools," I told him, keeping my voice as low and steady as possible. "Get out through the back patio door. Do not let her see your truck. Park down the street and wait for my call. Do not say a word to anyone." Trey did not hesitate. He scooped up his tool bag, gave me one last terrified look, and practically ran down the hallway toward the back of the house. I kicked the broken pieces of drywall under the bed and quickly pushed a heavy armchair in front of the damaged wall to block the view. The heavy oak front door swung open with a loud creak. "Hello," Chloe called out, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness she always used when she knew I was listening. "Cal, are you home? I brought you some organic soup." Her high heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. They were moving down the hallway, heading straight toward Vivian's room. She was coming to check on the wall. She was coming to see if her secret was still safe. I stood in the middle of the room, forcing my breathing to slow down. I wiped the dust from my hands onto my jeans. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my face was completely blank. I had interrogated mob bosses and billionaire tax evaders. I knew how to wear a mask. The cold plastic of the USB drive burned against my thigh and my pocket. The game had just begun, and I was going to play it better than anyone. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. The brass doorknob slowly turned. I hunched my shoulders, let my posture sag, and picked up one of Vivian's old knitted sweaters from the bed. I forced my hands to tremble just a little. When the door swung open, I was no longer a retired federal investigator. I was just a sad, confused, grieving old man. Chloe stood in the doorway. She was wearing a tailored beige suit, holding a porcelain bowl on a silver tray. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her lips were curved into a smile that looked like it had been painted on by a machine. "Oh, Cal. There you are," she said. Her voice was dripping with that fake, sugary concern she always used. "I brought you some organic butternut squash soup. I noticed you did not eat your breakfast this morning. We cannot have you wasting away in this dusty old room." "Thank you, Chloe," I mumbled, keeping my voice raspy and weak. I just wanted to smell her clothes. I miss her so much today. I clutched the sweater to my chest. Chloe stepped into the room. Her expensive perfume immediately overpowered the faint, comforting scent of my late wife. While she offered me the soup, her ice-blue eyes were not looking at my face. They were scanning the room. She looked at the closet. She looked at the floorboards. She was a predator inspecting her territory, making sure her secrets were still buried. Then her eyes locked onto the heavy armchair I had shoved against the wall to hide the smashed drywall. She frowned. The smile vanished from her face for a fraction of a second before she forced it back. "Cal, why is that heavy chair moved out of the corner?" she asked, taking a step toward it. "You know you should not be lifting heavy furniture at your age. Your heart might give out." The way she said it sounded less like a medical warning and more like a hopeful suggestion. I dropped a button, I lied, my voice wavering perfectly. A little pearl button from Vivian's favorite blouse. It rolled under the chair. I just nudged it a bit. I could not find it. My eyes are getting so bad lately. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. It was not entirely fake. The grief was always there, simmering just below the surface. Chloe stopped walking. She looked at me with an expression of profound disgust, masked quickly by a sigh of dramatic pity. She set the soup tray down on the small desk right next to the laptop where the USB drive was currently hidden in my pocket. "Well, leave it alone," she commanded softly. "Derek and I will hire a cleaning service to clear out this room next week. It is time to let go, Cal. You are just confusing yourself by sitting in here. Drink your soup before it gets cold." She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, pulling the door shut behind her. I stood perfectly still for 2 full minutes listening to her high heels click down the hallway, then down the stairs to the main floor. Once I was sure she was gone, my trembling stopped. My posture straightened. The confused old man evaporated, leaving only the forensic auditor. I walked over to the door and silently locked it. I pulled the black USB drive from my pocket and jammed it into the side of the laptop. My heart hammered a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. I opened the folder. There was only one video file. The timestamp showed it was recorded on October 12th of last year, exactly 3 days before my wife died of what the hospital called sudden heart failure. I clicked play. The video was silent, filmed from a low angle. Vivian must have hidden a small camera inside the hollowed-out spine of a book on her nightstand. The footage showed Vivian lying in her bed. She looked so frail, so tired, but her eyes were open and alert. Suddenly she closed her eyes and let her mouth fall open, pretending to be fast asleep. A moment later, the bedroom door opened. Chloe walked into the frame. I watched the screen, unable to breathe. Chloe did not check on Vivian. She did not ask if she needed anything. She walked straight to the bedside table where Vivian kept her daily pill organizer. Chloe pulled a small plastic bag from her pocket. Inside the bag were capsules filled with a thick white powder. With cold mechanical precision, Chloe popped open the Tuesday compartment of the pill organizer. She took out Vivian's red heart medication capsules. Then she replaced them with the white capsules from her bag. She slipped the real heart medication into her pocket. Then she leaned over my supposedly sleeping wife. The hidden camera picked up the audio perfectly. "Just go to sleep, old woman," Chloe whispered, staring down at Vivian with pure malice. "Derek needs the money now, not next year. You are taking up space." Chloe turned and walked out of the room. On the video, Vivian opened her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she did not panic. She slowly reached over, took the poisoned capsules out of the organizer and hid them inside a tissue box. Then she turned off the camera. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat in the chair staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. I did not cry. I did not scream. A strange, absolute coldness washed over me. It was a coldness I had never felt in my entire 71 years of life. My wife did not die of natural causes. She was murdered. She knew she was being poisoned and she gathered the evidence. But why did she not tell me? Why did she hide it in the wall? Because she knew I would have killed Chloe with my bare hands and spent the rest of my life in prison. Vivian was always the smart one. She hid the evidence knowing my auditor brain would eventually find the missing pieces. She gave me the tools to destroy them legally. She gave me the tools to execute them in the light of day. Derek needs the money now. Chloe's words echoed in my mind. My own son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I paid to put through business school. He was part of this. He sanctioned the murder of his own mother for a payout. I reached for the landline phone sitting on the desk. I needed to call the police. I needed to hand over the video to a homicide detective right now. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. Dead air. There was no dial tone, no static, nothing. I frowned and traced the phone cord down the back of the desk to the wall jack. The cord had been sliced clean through with a pair of wire cutters. A spike of alarm shot through my chest. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I looked at the top right corner of the screen. 0 bars. It said searching for service. That was impossible. I always had a perfect signal in this house. I walked over to the window and carefully parted the blinds, looking down at the front yard. Parked next to Chloe's Mercedes was a large, unmarked black SUV. Derek was standing on the driveway. He was wearing his expensive tailored suit, looking over his shoulder nervously. Standing next to him was a massive, heavily tattooed white man in a greasy mechanic shirt. The tattooed man closed a gray metal utility box attached to the side of our house. He locked it with a heavy padlock. Derek pulled a thick white envelope from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to the man. It was a thick stack of cash. The man nodded, got into his SUV, and drove away. My blood ran like ice water through my veins. I knew exactly what that gray box was. In my years tracking down cartel money launderers, I had seen them before. It was a military-grade signal jammer. They had cut the hard lines and blocked all cellular frequencies. I was completely cut off from the outside world. I could not call the police. I could not call an ambulance. I could not call a taxi. They did not just smash the wall looking for the video. They were preparing for their final move. They knew the money was running out, and they knew I was the only thing standing between them and the complete liquidation of my estate. I was locked inside a massive suburban house with the woman who murdered my wife and the son who ordered the hit. I let the blinds fall shut. I slipped the USB drive back into my pocket and tucked Vivian's diary into the waistband of my trousers. I had no phone. I had no allies inside these walls, but they made one fatal miscalculation. They thought they had trapped a helpless, grieving old man. They did not realize they had just locked themselves inside a cage with a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The house was dead quiet, but the heavy feeling of being trapped in a cage pressed down on my chest. I checked my cell phone. Still no service. The jammer was humming away outside. I knew if I panicked I would lose. I had to stick to the routine. I put on my worn-out sneakers, a faded gray windbreaker, and a baseball cap. I grabbed my wooden walking cane. It was time to play the part of the fading, harmless old man. I shuffled down the stairs, making sure to lean heavily on the banister. Derek and Chloe were already in the kitchen. Chloe was sipping an espresso, scrolling through her tablet while Derek was adjusting his expensive silk tie. They both stopped and stared at me as I dragged my feet across the hardwood floor. "Where do you think you are going so early?" Chloe asked. Her voice had that sickening, condescending tone people use when talking to a toddler. "Just going for my morning stroll," I mumbled, staring blankly at the front door. "My joints are stiff." "Doctor, Sterling said I need to keep the blood flowing." Derek stepped in front of the door, blocking my path. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "You should just stay inside, Dad. You got confused last time and wandered into the neighbor's yard. You need to rest." I forced a weak, trembling smile. "Just around the block, son. Just to the corner and back. I need some fresh air. It smells too much like medicine in here." Derek sighed in exaggerated annoyance and glanced at Chloe. She gave him a tiny nod. "Let him go, Derek. He cannot get far with that cane anyway." Derek stepped aside. "Do not be long," he ordered. I walked out the front door and down the driveway, moving at a painfully slow pace until I turned the corner. The moment their house was out of sight, my posture straightened. The cane stopped touching the ground. My stride became purposeful and swift. I pulled my phone out. Half a mile down the road, the signal bars finally returned. My first instinct was to dial 911, to tell them my son murdered my wife and locked me in a jammed house. But my 35 years at the IRS stopped my thumb from hitting the screen. I was a forensic auditor. I knew how the system worked. If an old man calls the police claiming his wealthy son is a murderer based on a hidden video, the police will knock on the door. Derek will smile, offer them coffee, and show them a piece of paper saying I am suffering from severe delusions. They will pat me on the back and leave me right there in the lion den. I needed the paper trail first. Money never lies. I needed to see exactly what Derek was protecting. I walked 2 miles to the downtown branch of the First National Bank. I had banked there for 40 years. Vivian and I built our entire life inside those vaults. I walked straight into the lobby and asked to see the branch manager, David Lawson. David had been managing my accounts for over a decade. When his secretary ushered me into his glass office, David stood up from his leather chair, but he did not smile. He looked pale, nervous, and profoundly uncomfortable. Calvin David said, his voice tight, "What are you doing here? Derek told me you were completely bedridden. I am standing right in front of you, David." I sat down in the chair across from his desk. "I need a full printout of all my accounts, the checking, the savings, and the retirement trust." David swallowed hard. He adjusted his glasses and looked at his computer screen, refusing to meet my eyes. "Calvin, I cannot do that. You know I cannot." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Those are my accounts. I built that trust fund with 35 years of government service. Pull up the balances. David turned his monitor slightly toward me. I looked at the screen. Checking account, $0. Savings account, $0. The joint retirement trust fund that held exactly $1.5 million, $0. Every single penny of my life savings was gone. The accounts were bled completely dry. "Where is my money, David?" I asked. The chill in my voice made him flinch. "Your son transferred it all, Calvin. He came in 3 months ago. He had the paperwork. It was all legally binding. Our compliance department cleared it within 24 hours. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of his mahogany desk. What paperwork allows my son to liquidate $1.5 million of my money without my physical presence? David pulled a thick file folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. I opened it. Lying right on top was a durable financial power of attorney. It was signed with my name. But the signature was a flawless forgery. Below that was a medical declaration of incompetence. It was signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne, a neurologist I had never met in my life. The medical document stated that Calvin Sterling was suffering from advanced rapid-onset Alzheimer's disease and was completely unfit to manage his own financial, legal, or medical affairs. I stared at the forged papers. The trap was so much deeper than I had realized. They did not just want to steal from me. They had legally erased my existence. On paper, I was already a ghost. If I went to the police right now, Derek would just pull out these exact documents. The police would look at the zero balances, look at the dementia diagnosis, and dismiss me as a confused old man looking for money he forgot he spent. "Calvin, I am so sorry," David whispered. "Derek said you were going into a highly specialized private care facility in Switzerland. He said the $1.5 million was needed up front for your lifetime medical care. My son is not sending me to Switzerland, David. He is sending me to an early grave." David looked horrified, but before he could speak, I saw another document underneath the medical file. It was a property deed. My property deed. "Why is the deed to my house in this file?" I asked, pulling the paper out. "Vivian and I paid off that mortgage in 2010. We owned that property free and clear." David wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Calvin, it gets worse. Derek did not just take the cash. Using the power of attorney, he took out a commercial mortgage against your house. He leveraged the full equity of the property. How much I demanded. $3 million, David said quietly. He took out a $3 million commercial loan and transferred the funds directly to a corporate account registered to Orchestrating. That is Chloe Tech startup company. I felt the room spin. Chloe fake tech company was entirely funded by the stolen equity of my home. The home I bought for my wife. The home where we raised our son. They had sucked the blood out of my life savings and then mortgaged the bones of my house to feed their greed. But that is not all of it. David continued, his voice shaking now. The commercial loan had a massive monthly interest payment. Derek has not made a single payment in 6 months. I stared at him, my mind putting the final pieces of the puzzle together. If the payments are in default for 6 months, then the bank is acting on the collateral. David nodded slowly. The foreclosure process is already complete, Calvin. The notices were sent to your house via certified mail. Someone signed for them. The bank officially owns the property now. The sheriff is scheduled to execute the eviction and lock the doors next Tuesday. You have exactly 1 week before you are thrown out onto the street. I sat back in the chair. The utter ruthlessness of it took my breath away. They had stolen my cash. They had stolen the equity of my house. And they stopped paying the loan on purpose. They wanted the bank to foreclose. They wanted the sheriff to come and throw me out. Because when the sheriff arrived to evict a supposedly dementia-riddled old man, Derek and Chloe would play the tragic, overwhelmed children. They would shrug, tell the authorities they lost the house, and immediately hand me over to a state-run psychiatric ward as a ward of the state. They would walk away with $4.5 million, and I would die in a padded room completely forgotten. I had $0 to my name. I had no home. I had a fake medical record branding me insane. I was legally and financially dead. Calvin. "What are you going to do?" David asked, looking at me with genuine pity. "You have nothing left. You cannot fight this in court. You do not even have money to hire a lawyer to prove the documents are forged." I stood up slowly. I picked up my wooden cane. I did not look at David with the eyes of a defeated old man. I looked at him with the eyes of a man who had spent 3 decades dismantling the most sophisticated financial syndicates in the country. "I am going to do what I have always done, David. I said, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying calm. "I am going to audit them, and when I am finished, they are going to wish they had just put a bullet in my head when they had the chance." I walked out of the bank and stepped into the cold Chicago wind. I had no money. I had no phone service at home. I had 7 days until I was homeless. I needed to get back into that house and retrieve the only weapon I had left, Vivian Diary and the USB drive. But I could not do it alone. I needed an inside man. I needed to find the weakest link in Chloe fake tech empire, and I needed to break it. The footprints of betrayal led straight to the one man I thought I could trust. I left the bank and walked 3 blocks to the law offices of Nathaniel Pierce. Nathaniel was an older black man, a fixture in our community. He drew up the original wills for Vivian and me 30 years ago. He knew our wishes. If anyone could file an emergency injunction to freeze a fraudulent power of attorney, it was him. I walked into his plush mahogany-paneled reception area. The receptionist recognized me and sent me right in. Nathaniel was sitting behind his massive desk. When he saw me, the color drained from his face. He did not look like a man happy to see an old friend. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Calvin," he stammered, standing up slowly. "What are you doing here? I was told you were resting at home." I sat down in the leather chair across from him. I laid both hands on my cane. "I am not resting, Nathaniel. I am being robbed. My son forged a power of attorney and a medical declaration of incompetence. He liquidated my trust and mortgaged my house. I need you to file an emergency revocation right now." Nathaniel swallowed hard. He did not look me in the eye. He looked down at his desk, picking up a gold pen and turning it over in his hands. I noticed something else. On his wrist was a brand new solid gold Patek Philippe watch. Nathaniel was a successful man, but he was always frugal. That watch was a $60,000 bribe sitting right there in plain sight. "Calvin, listen to me," Nathaniel said softly. "You have been under a lot of stress since Vivian passed. Sometimes grief can create confusion. Derek provided fully authenticated medical records. The signatures were notarized. The court has already recognized him as your legal guardian." My blood turned to ice. "You notarized them, did you not?" I asked. "My oldest friend in the legal business. You stamped a forgery because my son bought you a shiny new toy." Nathaniel avoided my gaze. He reached for his desk phone. "Let me make a call to a colleague at the courthouse," he said, his voice shaking. "Let us see what we can do to sort this out." He picked up the receiver and dialed. He thought I was just a blind, desperate old man, but 35 years of auditing taught me to read the micro-expressions of liars. I watched his fingers. He did not dial a local courthouse extension. He pressed a single speed dial button. He was not calling a judge. He was calling my son. I stood up. I did not yell. I just looked at him with absolute disgust. "You sold your soul, Nathaniel. I hope the money was worth it." I turned and walked toward the heavy oak door. I needed to get out of there. I needed to disappear before Derek arrived. But I was 71 years old and my knees were burning. I reached the reception area just as the glass front doors swung open. Derek walked in. He was wearing a sharp navy blue suit, looking every inch the successful executive. Flanking him were 2 massive men in dark suits. They did not look like lawyers. They looked like professional muscle. The kind of men who broke legs for a living. "Dad." Derek called out, his voice loud and full of fake concern. The receptionist looked up, sympathetic. Derek rushed over to me and grabbed my arm in a vice grip. His fingers dug painfully into my bicep. "What are you doing out of the house? You know you get confused. You forgot your medication today." I tried to pull my arm away, but his grip was like iron. "Let go of me, Derek," I said evenly. One of the massive men stepped up right behind me, his hand clamped down on my shoulder. "It is time to go home, Mr. Sterling," the man grumbled. His voice was low, meant only for me to hear. "Do not make a scene." They flanked me. To the receptionist, it looked like a loving son and his caretakers helping a dementia patient. To me, it was a kidnapping in broad daylight. They forced me out the glass doors and down the street to a black luxury SUV parked in the loading zone. The tinted windows hid the interior completely. The goon shoved me into the back seat. I stumbled and fell against the leather upholstery. Derek climbed in right beside me. The 2 massive men got into the front. The electronic locks clicked shut. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy Chicago traffic. I sat up straight, gripping my cane. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had protected. There was no fake smile on his face anymore. The mask was completely gone. He looked at me with an expression of pure, calculating coldness. You just could not stay in your room, could you? Derek said. His tone was flat and businesslike. You had to go wandering around town, making things difficult. You stole my life savings, I said, matching his coldness. You mortgaged the house I built. You bribed a notary and forged a medical decree. You are facing 20 years in federal prison, son. Derek laughed. It was a harsh, humorless sound. Federal prison. Who is going to put me there? You. You are legally a vegetable, Dad. Look at you. You have no money. You have no phone. By Tuesday, you will not even have a house. Who is going to believe a word that comes out of your mouth? I stared at him. The sheer arrogance was sickening. He thought he had planned for every variable, but he did not know about the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. He did not know about the video. I wanted to see how far his rot went. I needed to hear it from him. Is this what your mother and I worked our whole lives for? I asked, keeping my voice steady. So you could steal it all for Chloe and her fake tech company. Do not bring Mom into this. Derek snapped, his eyes flashing with sudden anger. Mom was weak. She hoarded that wealth while I was drowning in debt. I needed capital to keep my fund afloat. Chloe needed capital to scale her company. We asked her for a loan. She said no. She said we needed to learn financial responsibility. I felt a cold dread creeping up the back of my neck. I kept my eyes locked on his. And what did you do about that, Derek? Derek leaned in close. I could smell the expensive cologne and the stale coffee on his breath. His eyes were completely dead. We did what we had to do, Dad. He whispered the words, but they hit me like a physical blow. We expedited the inheritance. Mom was already sick. We just helped nature take its course a little faster. My breath caught in my throat. I had seen the video. I knew Chloe switched the pills. But hearing my own flesh and blood admit to it, hearing him justify the murder of his own mother for a payout, it broke something fundamental inside me. The last shred of paternal love I had for this man withered and died, turning into ash. You killed her, I whispered. Derek leaned back, adjusting his cuffs. Chloe handled the logistics. I handled the finances. It was a business decision. And right now, Dad, you are a bad business decision. He tapped the dark-tinted window. Here's how this is going to work, Derek said, his voice dripping with authority. We are taking you back to the house. You are going to go down to the basement guest room, and you are going to stay there. You are not going to leave. On Tuesday, a private medical transport will arrive to take you to the Pine Hills Care Facility. It is a very secure, very discreet psychiatric ward. And if I refuse, I asked softly. Derek smiled. It was the smile of a devil. If you make a fuss, if you try to run again, then you will have a sudden stroke, just like Mom did. And then Chloe and I will not have to pay the monthly fees for the nursing home. My own son was a murderer. He had a team. My own son was a murderer. He had a team of goons. He had a corrupt lawyer. He had absolute legal control over my life. He thought he had completely checkmated me. But he made one critical mistake. He brought me back to the house. He was putting me right back in the same building where his criminal empire kept its secrets. He thought I was just an old man with a cane. He forgot that I was the man who taught him how to count. He forgot that I was an auditor. And an auditor never leaves a job unfinished. The SUV turned onto our street and pulled into the driveway. The jammer was still humming on the side of the house. I was completely cut off. A prisoner in my own home. Get out, Derek ordered as the goon opened my door. I stepped out onto the driveway. I leaned heavily on my cane, letting my shoulders slump. I let him see the defeated, broken old man he wanted to see. I shuffled toward the front door, head bowed. I was entering my prison, but I was bringing the key right in my pocket. The war was no longer about money. It was about vengeance, and I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. The basement of my own home was cold and smelled of damp concrete. They had stripped me of my shoes, my wallet, my keys, and my dignity. Derek and his hired muscle practically threw me down the wooden stairs before slamming the heavy door shut. I heard the distinct sharp beep of the electronic deadbolt engaging. Derek had installed that high-security lock 6 months ago, claiming it was to keep burglars out of my old tool room. Now I knew the truth. He was building my prison cell. I sat on a dusty canvas cot in the corner. The single exposed light bulb above me flickered. I was 71 years old, locked in the dark, waiting for my son to send me to a psychiatric ward to die. But I did not cry. I had shed my last tear for my son in that SUV. Now my mind was perfectly clear, operating with the cold mechanical precision of a forensic auditor who had just found a loose thread in a corrupt ledger. Heavy footsteps clicked on the wooden stairs. The electronic lock beeped and the heavy door swung open. It was Chloe. She was holding a silver clipboard and a shiny silver pen. She stood at the bottom of the stairs looking at me with absolute contempt. Without her husband or the public around, the sweet daughter-in-law act was completely dead. "Sign this, Cal," she demanded, tossing the clipboard onto my lap. It hit my legs with a heavy thud. I looked down at the paper. It was a voluntary admission form for the Pine Hills Care Facility. It was a document stating that I willingly surrendered my medical and legal autonomy due to severe cognitive decline. "If I sign this, I am signing my life away," I said, keeping my voice low and raspy, playing the part of the defeated old man. Chloe let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Your life is already over, Cal. You are just too stubborn to lie down. Derek is being generous by giving you the option to go voluntarily. It looks better for the lawyers. It makes the transition of your assets much smoother." "And if I refuse to sign it?" I asked, looking up at her icy blue eyes. She took a step closer. The smell of her expensive perfume filled the damp basement, making my stomach churn. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. "If you do not sign it, I will make you a cup of tea, Cal. Just like the tea I made for Vivian when she was being stubborn. Do you understand me? You will have a massive, fatal stroke right here on this dirty cot, and Derek and I will cry our eyes out at your funeral." She was looking right at me, threatening my life with the exact same method she used to murder my wife. My fingers twitched. Every primal instinct in my body screamed at me to wrap my hands around her throat and squeeze until her arrogant eyes popped out of her head. But I am an auditor. I know that violence is sloppy. Paperwork is absolute. I let my hands shake. I looked down at the floor. "Give me until tomorrow morning," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "Let me pray on it. I will sign it tomorrow." Chloe smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just broken its prey. "Do not make me come down here with a teacup, Cal." She turned around, marched up the wooden stairs, and slammed the door. The electronic deadbolt beeped and locked. I was alone again. I waited for 1 hour. I sat perfectly still in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house. I heard the floorboards creak above me. I heard the distant murmur of the television in the living room. Then I heard the heavy footsteps of Derek and Chloe heading upstairs to the master bedroom. I waited another 30 minutes until the house was swallowed by the absolute silence of 2 a.m. Then I stood up. My son thought an electronic keypad could hold me. He forgot that before I was a federal tax investigator, I was a young black man growing up on the south side of Chicago. I knew how to take things apart, and I knew how to put them together. I walked over to a stack of cardboard boxes in the corner. I dug through the old junk until I found my vintage Zenith transistor radio. I used to listen to baseball games on it while fixing things in the yard. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from my old workbench and cracked the plastic casing of the radio wide open. I pulled out the heavy alkaline battery and yanked a long, thick copper wire from the antenna circuit. I walked up the wooden stairs in my socks, making no sound. I stood in front of the heavy door. The electronic lock had a small plastic panel on the inside. I wedged the flathead screwdriver into the seam of the plastic and popped the cover off, exposing the green circuit board and the wiring harness. Electronic locks of this grade fail safe when overloaded. It is a fire safety protocol. If the circuit shorts out completely, the magnetic bolt retracts to prevent people from burning to death inside a room. I stripped the ends of the copper wire with my teeth. I pressed one raw end against the positive terminal of the heavy radio battery, and I jammed the other raw end directly across the primary relay on the lock circuit board. A bright blue spark popped in the dark. The circuit board hissed and smoked. A second later, the heavy magnetic bolt slammed back into the door frame with a loud clack. I was out. I pushed the door open and stepped into the main hallway. The house was pitch black. I moved like a ghost. I knew every creaky floorboard in this house because I was the one who nailed them down 30 years ago. I bypassed the squeaky spot near the kitchen. I slipped past the living room and headed straight for the den. Chloe had converted Vivian's old reading room into her home office. It was the nerve center of her tech startup Orchestrating. I opened the door and slipped inside. Sitting on the sleek glass desk was her massive desktop computer. The screen was dark, but the power light was pulsing. It was in sleep mode. I tapped the keyboard. The screen flared to life, asking for a password. I did not panic. I knew Chloe. She was incredibly arrogant, and arrogant people are always lazy when it comes to security because they believe they are untouchable. She would not memorize a complex alphanumeric string. She would write it down. I opened the top drawer of her desk. Nothing but expensive pens. I opened the second drawer. I checked under the mouse pad. Nothing. Then I remembered her vanity. I picked up the framed photograph of her and Derek sitting on her desk. I slid the back panel off the frame. A small yellow sticky note fluttered down onto the glass desk. Written in her neat handwriting was a single word and a number. Dubai, 2026. I typed the password into the prompt. The computer unlocked. I did not care about her glossy marketing presentations or her fancy graphic design folders. My eyes scanned the desktop until I found what I needed. A folder titled Master Financials. I opened it. As a forensic auditor for 35 years, I had analyzed the books of drug cartels, corrupt politicians, and corporate embezzlers. It took me exactly 4 minutes to realize that Orchestrating was not a technology company. It was a massive empty shell. I opened the main ledger spreadsheet. The numbers painted a horrifying crystal-clear picture. There was no software development. There was no product. Chloe was taking millions of dollars from new investors and using that cash to pay fake dividends to her early investors. It was the definition of a Ponzi scheme. She was robbing Peter to pay Paul. But the scheme was collapsing. The spreadsheet showed a massive deficit. She owed her investors $12 million and the company accounts were completely drained. They were bleeding cash. That was why Derek had stopped paying the mortgage on my house. They did not just want to steal my money. They needed it to plug a massive hole in a federal fraud case. I dug deeper into the files. I opened a subfolder labeled Exit Strategy. Inside was a PDF document from Emirates Airlines. It was a confirmed flight itinerary. 2 one-way first-class tickets to Dubai. The departure date was next Wednesday, exactly 1 day after the sheriff was scheduled to evict me from my home and hand me over to the psychiatric ward. The pieces clicked together perfectly. Derek had taken out a $3 million commercial loan against my house. They were going to let the bank foreclose and throw me out. Once I was locked in a mental institution, Derek would empty my stolen $1.5 million trust fund into offshore accounts. Then he and Chloe would board a plane to Dubai, a country with no extradition treaty. They would escape with millions, leaving their investors bankrupt and leaving me to rot in a padded cell. I stared at the glowing screen. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect crime. They thought they had buried all their sins. I pulled the black USB drive containing the video of my wife's murder from my pocket. I plugged it into Chloe's computer. I quickly copied her entire master financial ledger, the Ponzi scheme evidence, and the flight itineraries directly onto the drive right next to the murder video. I pulled the drive out and slipped it back into my pocket. I had the murder weapon. I had the financial motive. I had their escape plan. They thought I was a helpless old man, but they had just handed a loaded gun to the best IRS auditor in Chicago. I turned off the monitor, put the sticky note back behind the photograph, and slipped out of the office. The sun was going to rise in a few hours, and I needed to find a way to light the match that would burn their empire to the ground. I crept back down the wooden stairs to the damp basement and carefully reconnected the wiring of the electronic lock. I sat on the hard canvas cot holding the small black USB drive in the palm of my hand. I had the murder video showing Chloe swapping my wife's pills. I had the master financial ledgers detailing a $12 million fraud. I had the flight tickets to Dubai. I had enough evidence to put my son and his wife away for the rest of their natural lives. But my 35 years as an investigator for the IRS reminded me of a bitter, insurmountable legal reality. I was a ghost. Derek had filed a notarized medical decree stating I suffered from advanced and aggressive dementia. If I walked into a police station and handed a detective this drive, Derek would simply tell the authorities I stole Chloe's work laptop in a fit of paranoid delusion and fabricated the whole story. Any decent defense attorney would get the digital evidence thrown out as the manic obsession of a dying brain. I could not be the one to deliver the kill shot to the authorities. I needed a proxy. I needed an inside man with a clean criminal record and a heavy conscience. I closed my eyes in the dark and thought about the people in Chloe's orbit. Her fake tech startup Orchestrating was staffed mostly by young, hungry graduates who thought they were changing the world. But there was one man who stood out from the rest. Liam. He was a 26-year-old white kid fresh out of business school, drowning in student debt. He was Chloe's personal executive assistant. I remembered how Chloe treated him whenever he came to the house to drop off documents. She snapped her manicured fingers at him. She made him pick up her dry cleaning. She humiliated him in front of guests. But more importantly, when I was scrolling through her master financial ledger in the office upstairs, I noticed something absolutely terrifying for that young man. Chloe was not listed as the chief compliance officer of Orchestrating. Liam was. She had forged his digital signature on all the federal regulatory filings. When the Ponzi scheme inevitably collapsed, Chloe and Derek would be drinking expensive champagne in Dubai, and the federal government would kick down Liam's apartment door. He was the designated fall guy. The next morning, the universe gave me my opening. Through the small, dirty basement window near the ceiling, I saw Liam pull his beat-up sedan into the driveway. He was carrying a thick stack of manila folders and a box of expensive pastries for Chloe. I knew Derek was in the shower upstairs and Chloe was locked in her bathroom doing her makeup routine. I quickly hot-wired my basement door again, slipped out quietly, and intercepted Liam in the kitchen just as he walked through the back door. When he saw me standing there, he offered a sad, pitying smile. "Good morning, Cal," he said softly. "Are you feeling okay today? Chloe mentioned you were having a really bad week with your memory." I did not give him the trembling, confused old man routine. I stood up perfectly straight. I looked him dead in the eye and my voice was as sharp and cold as a razor. "I am perfectly fine, Liam," I told him, "but you are facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary." He froze completely. The expensive pastry box slipped from his hands and hit the marble kitchen counter with a dull thud. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, looking around nervously. "Chloe said your mind was going. She said you did not know where you were half the time." I took a step closer, cornering him against the island. "My mind is sharper than yours will ever be, kid. I spent 3 decades auditing financial fraud for the Internal Revenue Service. I know a Ponzi scheme when I see one. Orchestrating is a massive shell company. Chloe is bleeding $12 million from new investors to pay off the old ones, and she officially named you as the chief compliance officer on all the federal tax documents." All the color drained from his face. His pale skin turned chalk white. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the kitchen tiles. "I did not sign any compliance forms," he whispered, panic rising in his throat. "I am just her assistant. I have not even been paid my regular salary in 3 months. She keeps telling me the Series B funding round is delayed by the banks." "She is lying to your face," I said coldly. "She and Derek are boarding a first-class flight to Dubai next Wednesday. They are taking all the stolen money and they are leaving you here to take the fall. The feds will seize your bank accounts. They will destroy your future. You will take the blame for the entire $12 million fraud." Liam started to hyperventilate. He grabbed the edge of the granite counter to steady his shaking legs. "What do I do?" he gasped. "I cannot go to jail. I did nothing wrong. I swear to you I did not know they were stealing." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black USB drive. "I need you to be my courier," I told him, keeping my voice low and urgent. "But first we need to establish an undeniable chain of custody for the authorities. This drive has the internal ledgers, but defense lawyers can argue I manipulated the files on a home computer. I need you to go to the Orchestrating office right now. Log into the secure central server using your administrator credentials. Download the live transaction history directly onto this drive. Once the live data matches the files I already pulled, the FBI will have an airtight case. They will grant you full immunity as a protected whistleblower." Liam stared at the small black drive resting in my palm. He was terrified of Chloe, but he was far more terrified of the federal government. He reached out with a trembling hand, took the drive, and slipped it deep into his jacket pocket. "I will do it," he whispered frantically. "I am going straight to the office right now." He turned around and practically ran out the back door, leaving the files and pastries behind. I slipped back down to the basement, reconnected the electronic lock, and sat in the dark. Now all I had to do was wait. If Liam succeeded, we would have the final nail for their coffin. 2 agonizing hours passed. I sat on my canvas cot, staring at the blank concrete wall, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. Upstairs, I heard Derek walking heavily across the living room floor. He was pacing back and forth, probably talking on the phone with his corrupt lawyers. Then suddenly, his heavy footsteps stopped dead. Even through the thick wooden floorboards, I heard his cell phone emit a sharp, piercing alarm. It was not a regular ringtone or a text message chime. It was a high-pitched, frantic digital siren. I held my breath in the dark. Derek shouted something unintelligible and furious. A moment later, I heard Chloe running down the stairs in her heels. "What is going on?" she yelled. "Why is your phone making that sound?" Derek's voice was trembling with absolute rage. "The core cybersecurity protocol just tripped," he roared. "Someone is bypassing the main firewall at the Orchestrating office right now. They are downloading the master server logs to an external drive. Who? Chloe screamed, panic totally consuming her voice. Who is at the office on a Saturday? I heard the sound of keys jangling and a heavy decorative vase being swept off a table, shattering loudly on the hardwood floor. It is Liam, Derek yelled. That stupid little kid is downloading our entire financial history onto a physical drive. He is using his own credentials. My heart plummeted into my stomach. The central server had a real-time fail-safe protocol. I should have anticipated that level of corporate paranoia. Chloe and Derek were amateur criminals in many ways, but they had bought expensive security software to protect their stolen millions. "Call the private security team!" Chloe shrieked. "Do not let him leave that building with those files. Lock the doors. I am going there right now myself," Derek snarled. "If he walks out of that lobby with that data, we are dead. We will spend the rest of our lives in prison." The front door slammed shut with such violent force that the entire foundation of the house shook. I heard the tires of Derek's heavy SUV screech against the asphalt as he sped away down the street. I sat in the cold, dark basement, my hands gripping the rigid edge of the cot. Liam was just a scared kid with a USB drive trapped inside a glass office building. Derek was a desperate, ruthless murderer speeding toward him with everything to lose. I had sent that boy directly into a death trap, and I was locked behind a steel door, completely powerless to help him. The heavy thud of Derek slamming the front door echoed through the floorboards above my head. I heard the tires of his SUV screeching against the asphalt as he sped off toward the city. He was going to hunt down Liam. He was taking his private security team men who broke bones and asked questions later to intercept a terrified 26-year-old kid who was holding the only evidence that could put my son behind bars. I had no time to sit in the dark and hope for the best. An auditor does not rely on hope. An auditor relies on assets, leverage, and contingency plans. I grabbed my screwdriver and hot-wired the electronic lock on the basement door for the second time. The magnetic bolt snapped back. I pushed the door open and climbed the wooden stairs as fast as my 71-year-old knees would allow. I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to the utility closet in the laundry room. Derek and Chloe thought they had stripped me of all my resources when they drained my bank accounts, but they did not know the man they were dealing with. When you spend 35 years working for the Internal Revenue Service tracking down hidden wealth, you learn a fundamental truth about survival. Never put all your cash in a place that has a digital footprint. I moved the heavy boxes of laundry detergent aside and knelt on the linoleum floor. I took my flathead screwdriver and wedged it under the loose baseboard in the corner. I pried it away from the wall. Behind the wooden trim was a hollow cavity in the drywall. I reached my hand inside and pulled out a thick vacuum-sealed plastic bag. Inside the bag were 50 crisp $100 bills, $5,000 in untraceable cash. Next to the money was a cheap prepaid cell phone I had bought 3 years ago for emergencies. I powered on the burner phone. It had full battery. I dialed the only man in Chicago who owed me his life and who knew the layout of the downtown tech district well enough to pull off a miracle. Trey answered on the second ring. He sounded exhausted, probably still shaken from finding the smashed wall in Vivian's room the day before. "Trey, I need you right now," I said, keeping my voice sharp and commanding. "Get in your plumbing van and drive to the Orchestrating building in the financial district. Do not park in the front. Pull into the underground loading dock." "Cal, what is going on?" Trey asked, the panic rising in his voice. "Are you okay? Did they find out you were in the room?" "I am fine, but a kid named Liam is about to be murdered by my son," I told him. "He is downloading the financial records that prove Derek and his wife are running a $12 million fraud. Derek is on his way there with armed men to stop him. You need to get to that loading dock. Liam is a skinny white kid in a cheap suit. He will be running for his life. You open your side door, you pull him in, and you drive him to the Starlight Motel on the outskirts of Joliet." "Cal, this sounds like cartel business," Trey stammered. "I am just a contractor. I cannot mess with armed men." "Listen to me," I said, softening my tone just enough to reach his heart. 10 years ago, when the bank was going to take your house, Vivian and I paid off your arrears. We kept a roof over your daughter's head. I have never asked you for a single favor in return, but I am asking now. Vivian was murdered, Trey. They poisoned her, and this kid is holding the weapon that will hang them for it." The line went dead silent. I could hear Trey breathing heavily. The mention of Vivian's murder struck him like a physical blow. He loved my wife. She used to bake pies for his family every Thanksgiving. "I will be at the loading dock in 12 minutes, Trey said, his voice dropping an octave, replacing fear with cold resolve. I told him I was leaving an envelope with $5,000 in cash tucked inside his spare tool bag that he had abandoned in my backyard shed yesterday. I told him to use the cash to pay for the motel in advance and to buy Liam food and clean clothes. I told him to keep the kid off the internet and away from any windows. I hung up the phone and wiped my fingerprints off the plastic casing. I went to the kitchen and looked at the marble counter. Just as I hoped, when Liam had run out of the house in a blind panic, he had dropped his work bag, but he had deliberately left a small disposable cell phone sitting next to the fruit bowl. It was his backup phone, the one he used to call overseas clients without being tracked by Chloe. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Now I had my own secure line to the outside world. I walked out the back door, slipped the envelope of cash into Trey's tool bag in the shed, and hurried back inside. I went straight down to the basement, pulled the door shut, and carefully reconnected the wiring of the electronic lock. The deadbolt snapped into place, locking me in from the outside. I sat back down on the damp canvas cot and waited. The physical exertion made my chest ache, but my mind was racing. Everything depended on Trey's driving and Liam's speed. 3 agonizing hours passed in the dark. Then I heard the heavy roar of Derek's SUV pulling into the driveway. The engine cut off. The front door of the house flew open and slammed against the wall with the force of an explosion. He got away. Derek screamed. His voice was raw, echoing with an uncontrolled, violent fury. He got out through the service elevator. The security guard said a white plumbing van blew through the parking gate right before we pulled up. I heard a glass smash against the hardwood floor. Chloe was screaming now. Her voice was shrill, completely devoid of her usual polished corporate elegance. How did he know she shrieked? How did that stupid little assistant know to download the master ledgers? He is too cowardly to pull a stunt like this on his own. Someone tipped him off. Someone told him the company was bleeding out. He took everything, Chloe, Derek roared back. He took the flight itineraries. He took the offshore routing numbers. If he goes to the FBI, they will freeze our accounts by Monday morning. We will not even have the money to buy a plane ticket out of the state, let alone Dubai. I sat in the basement listening to their empire crumble. They were turning on each other, tearing at their own throats like cornered animals. I had successfully orchestrated a massive data heist from a locked basement room. Liam was safe in Joliet with Trey. The USB drive was secured, but Chloe needed a target. She needed something to break. I heard her high heels stomping furiously across the living room floor. She was marching toward the basement door. The keypad beeped rapidly. The heavy door flew open. Chloe stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the hallway light. She looked like a demon. Her blonde hair was a mess. Her designer jacket was wrinkled and her chest was heaving. She stomped down the wooden stairs, her eyes locked onto me. I immediately hunched my shoulders, let my hands tremble, and stared at the floor, playing the part of the confused, terrified old man. "What did you do?" she hissed, grabbing me by the collar of my faded windbreaker and yanking me upward. "Did you talk to Liam this morning? What did you say to him when he brought the files?" I let my eyes wander aimlessly. "Who is Liam?" I mumbled, making my voice sound thick and lost. "I just want my wife." "Where did Vivian go? She was supposed to bring me my tea." Chloe let out a scream of pure frustration. She let go of my collar and swung her arm. Her open palm struck me across the face with the force of a whip. The slap echoed loudly in the concrete room. My head snapped to the side. A sharp, stinging pain radiated across my cheek, and I tasted the warm, metallic tang of blood where my teeth bit into my inner lip. I fell back onto the cot, holding my face, whimpering softly. But behind the act, behind the fake tears, my eyes were tracking her every movement. I absorbed the hit. I registered the pain, and I added it to her final audit. "Stop playing stupid with me, you old parasite," Chloe spat, pointing a shaking finger in my face. "You are the reason we are stuck in this mess. You and your miserable, stubborn life. If you had just died when you were supposed to, we would be out of this country by now." She leaned down, bringing her face inches from mine. I could smell the vodka on her breath. She had been drinking to calm her nerves, and it was only making her more reckless. "Listen to me very carefully, Cal," she whispered, her voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fear and hatred. "I do not care if the FBI is coming. I do not care if that assistant runs to the police. We are finishing this tomorrow. The private psychiatric transport is coming for you at 8 in the morning. We expedited the order." I stared at her, letting my lip bleed, keeping my expression perfectly terrified. "You are going into a straitjacket tomorrow, Cal," she said, a cruel, vicious smile spreading across her face. They are going to drug you until you cannot remember your own name. You will never see the sky again. You will die of old age in a padded room completely alone, and nobody will ever know what really happened to your precious Vivian." She stood up, smoothed out her wrinkled jacket, and marched back up the stairs. The door slammed shut, and the deadbolt locked me in the dark once again. I wiped the blood from my chin with the back of my hand. The metallic taste lingered in my mouth. She thought she had won. She thought the psychiatric ward was my final destination. She did not realize that I had just secured the murder weapon, protected the star witness, and acquired a clean burner phone. I pulled Liam's disposable phone from my pocket. The screen lit up the dark basement with a pale blue glow. The clock was ticking. I had less than 12 hours before the men in white coats arrived to take me away. It was time to make the phone call that would bring the full, terrifying weight of the United States government crashing down on my son's head. The basement was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning unit. I stared at the small screen of the burner phone Liam had left behind. The pale blue light illuminated my hands. My knuckles were swollen and the side of my face still throbbed from where Chloe had slapped me. I had less than 24 hours before the private medical transport arrived to take me to the psychiatric ward. I needed to move the mountain, and I needed to do it now. I dialed a 10-digit number I had memorized 15 years ago. It was a direct line to a secure office in Washington. The office belonged to Marcus Vance. Marcus was the former director of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The IRSCI is the only federal law enforcement agency with jurisdiction over federal tax crimes, and they have a conviction rate of nearly 90%. Drug cartels, mob bosses, and corrupt politicians fear the FBI, but they are terrified of the IRS. Marcus and I had worked together for 2 decades. We dismantled financial empires built on blood and greed. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Vance." "Marcus, it is, Cal," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Calvin Sterling." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Marcus spoke, his tone shifting from professional to concerned. "Cal, I thought you retired. I heard about Vivian passing away. I am so sorry, old friend. But why are you calling this secure line at 3 in the morning? "I need the cavalry, Marcus," I told him. "I am locked in my own basement. My son and his wife murdered Vivian. They forged a medical decree claiming I have severe dementia. They bribed a notary. They liquidated my $1.5 million retirement trust. They took out a $3 million commercial mortgage on my house, and they are preparing to flee to Dubai next Wednesday." I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Marcus was a man who had seen every level of human depravity, but hearing this happening to one of his own men left him temporarily speechless. Cal, Marcus finally said, his voice dropping into that deadly serious tone I knew so well. "Give me the details. Give me the paper trail." I gave him everything. I told him about Chloe and her fake tech startup, Orchestrating. I explained how it was nothing but a $12 million Ponzi scheme used to funnel money from new investors to pay off the old ones. I told him how they were bleeding cash and how they used my stolen home equity to keep the fraud alive just long enough to execute their exit strategy. "I have the master ledgers," I continued. "I have the offshore routing numbers for their bank in Dubai. I have the video of Chloe swapping Vivian heart medication for a lethal dose of sedatives. I copied all of it onto a secure drive. Right now, Chloe Young executive assistant Liam is sitting in a motel room in Joliet. I sent my contractor Trey to secure him. Liam is the designated fall guy. Chloe forged his signature on all the federal compliance forms. He is terrified and he is ready to turn state evidence in exchange for immunity." Marcus cursed under his breath. "We have wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Cal, this is a federal nightmare. I can have a tactical unit at your house in 20 minutes to kick down that basement door and arrest them both." "No," I said sharply. "Do not send anyone to the house." "Why not?" Marcus asked. "Because they have a locally approved medical guardianship," I explained. "They have a corrupt lawyer and probably a corrupt judge in their pocket. If local police or even regular federal agents show up, Derek will wave that piece of paper in their faces. He will say, 'I am a violent dementia patient who made up a fantasy.' They will destroy the hard drives upstairs before you can get a warrant. We cannot give them a single inch of breathing room. We need an ironclad, indisputable federal mandate that overrides any local medical decree they forged." Marcus was silent for a moment, processing the legal chess match. "You are right," he admitted. We need to catch them in the act of committing a major federal crime. If we catch them executing a live money laundering operation, the Financial Crimes Division can seize all their assets instantly under the Patriot Act. That bypasses the local guardianship completely. We freeze the money, we cut off their escape route, and the murder charges follow right behind. But we need a live transaction, Marcus continued. We need them moving dirty money across state or international lines while we are watching. I have exactly what you need, I told him. A cold smile spread across my bruised face in the dark. Tomorrow night, Chloe is hosting the Orchestrating Series B funding gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown. It is a massive event. She has invited the city elite local politicians and major venture capitalists. She is expecting to collect $10 million in new investments to supposedly scale her software, but the software does not exist. If she accepts those funds, Marcus said the pieces clicking together in his mind and attempts to route them to the Orchestrating corporate accounts, that is wire fraud. And the moment she tries to sweep those funds into the offshore Dubai accounts she set up for their escape, I added, that is international money laundering. In real time, in front of hundreds of witnesses. It is the perfect trap, Marcus said, the excitement of the hunt bleeding into his voice. I will mobilize the criminal investigation strike team. We will have forensic accountants monitoring the banking nodes. The moment Chloe hits the button to transfer those investor funds, we lock the accounts and raid the gala. But Cal, we need eyes inside that room. We need someone to ensure the transaction happens and to secure the local servers they are using at the event. I will be there, I said. I will be inside the gala. I will have the original USB drive with the murder video and the master ledgers. I will plug it directly into their presentation system. I want the whole world to see exactly who they are. Cal, listen to me, Marcus warned. You just said they expedited a private psychiatric transport for you. They are coming to put you in a straitjacket at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. How are you going to get to the gala if you are locked in a padded room? I looked at the heavy basement door. My mind was already 3 steps ahead. Do not worry about the transport, Marcus. I have a plan for that too. Just have your agents ready at the Grand Plaza Hotel tomorrow night. And Marcus, tell your team to wear their best suits. It is going to be a very elegant execution. I will see you tomorrow, Cal. Stay sharp, Marcus said, and the line disconnected. I lowered the phone and let out a long, slow breath. The federal trap was set. The most powerful financial law enforcement agency in the country was officially hunting my son and his wife. But to make it to the gala, I had to survive the morning. I had to let them think they had won. I had to walk willingly into the hands of the men coming to lock me away. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the concrete wall. They thought they were sending me to the graveyard. They did not know I was going to use their own hearse to drive straight to the battlefield. The basement door clicked open at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. Heavy boots marched down the wooden stairs. I sat on the edge of the damp canvas cot, my shoulders slumped, my hands resting weakly on the handle of my wooden cane. I stared blankly at the concrete floor. 2 men in white medical scrubs stood at the bottom of the stairs. They looked like bouncers, thick and muscular, carrying a heavy canvas restraint jacket over one arm. Derek and Chloe walked down right behind them. They were already dressed for their grand evening. Derek wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than a reliable used car. Chloe was zipped into a sleek black evening gown, her neck dripping with diamonds she bought using my stolen credit cards. They looked like royalty descending into a dungeon. Chloe stepped forward and crossed her arms. Her ice-blue eyes scanned me with absolute disgust. Well, Cal, your ride is here. The facility is expecting you. They have a nice quiet room ready, no sharp objects, no windows you can open. You will finally get the rest you desperately need. I did not look up. I let my hands shake slightly. I mumbled that I just wanted my wife. I asked if Vivian was coming with me. Derek sighed loudly, adjusting his expensive silk cuffs. He is completely gone, Chloe. Let them take him. We have a $10 million gala to host tonight. I cannot have his pathetic whining ruining my focus. The 2 orderlies stepped forward. They grabbed me by the arms, pulling me up from the cot. I did not resist. I let my legs drag. I made myself heavy, clumsy, and completely docile. I let them guide me up the stairs through the kitchen and out the front door. The morning air was sharp and cold. A white transport van with tinted windows idled in the driveway. The engine rumbled. I shuffled toward the back doors. Chloe called out from the porch. Goodbye, Cal. Do not cause trouble for the nurses. I let them lift me into the back of the transport. They strapped me into a heavy leather seat bolted to the floor. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, plunging the back of the van into shadows. The engine revved and the van rolled down the driveway, pulling away from my house. I waited exactly 4 minutes. I counted the turns. 2 lefts, 1 right. We were on the main arterial road far beyond the range of Derek's signal jammer. The transport van had a metal wire mesh separating the patient cabin from the driver's seat. There was only one orderly in the back with me, a younger guy with a shaved head who was busy scrolling through his smartphone. The driver was navigating the heavy morning traffic. I stopped shaking. I straightened my spine. I reached down to my left foot and unlaced my worn-out sneaker. I pulled the shoe off, reached under the thick orthotic insole, and pulled out a heavy object wrapped in a dark cloth. I unwrapped it. It was a vintage 1976 Rolex day date, solid 18-karat gold. It was the anniversary gift Vivian bought me when I made senior investigator at the IRS. It was the only asset I had left that Derek did not know about because I never wore it. I kept it hidden for a rainy day. I tapped my wooden cane hard against the metal mesh. The sound echoed loudly in the confined space. The orderly in the back jumped, dropping his phone. "Hey, sit still, old man," he snapped. I looked directly into his eyes. My voice was no longer the raspy, confused whisper of a dementia patient. It was the deep, commanding tone of a federal agent. "Tell the driver to pull over right now," I ordered. The orderly frowned, stepping toward me. "Listen, buddy, you are confused. You are going to a facility." I held up the heavy gold Rolex. The morning light filtering through the tinted windows caught the gold bezel. It gleamed perfectly. "I am not confused," I told him calmly. "I am a retired federal tax investigator. The people who hired you are currently under investigation for a $12 million federal fraud. By transporting me against my will, you are actively participating in a kidnapping and conspiracy. However, if you tell your driver to change his route, you walk away with this watch. It is worth $30,000 cash on the secondary market. That is more than both of you make in a year." The orderly stared at the watch. He looked at my face. He saw no confusion, no dementia, only absolute cold authority. He swallowed hard. He turned to the wire mesh and banged his fist against it. "Hey, Marcus, pull over. Pull over right now." The van swerved onto the shoulder and jerked to a stop. The driver slid the partition window open. "What is the problem back there?" the driver asked. I held the Rolex up to the window. "Change of destination, gentlemen. You are taking me to the Dirksen Federal Building downtown. You drop me at the front steps, you take the watch, and you forget you ever saw me today. Or you take me to the psychiatric ward, and I guarantee you will both be sitting in federal prison by Monday morning. The choice is yours." The driver stared at the gold watch, then looked at the orderly. The orderly nodded. The driver threw the van back into gear and merged onto the highway, heading straight for downtown Chicago. 30 minutes later, the white transport van pulled up to the imposing concrete pillars of the federal building. I unbuckled my restraints, handed the heavy gold watch through the partition window, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. I did not look back as the van sped away. I had sacrificed my last piece of Vivian, but it was a necessary casualty of war. I walked through the heavy glass doors, passed through the security metal detectors, and took the elevator up to the 12th floor. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Marcus Vance had made the calls. The receptionist was expecting me. She immediately escorted me into a secure conference room. Waiting for me at the heavy mahogany table was a federal magistrate judge and 3 senior IRS forensic accountants. They had the paperwork prepared exactly as I had requested over my burner phone the night before. "Calvin, it is good to see you," the lead accountant said, pushing a thick stack of documents across the table. "We reviewed the master ledgers you intercepted from your daughter-in-law. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme, but we need to secure your assets before we spring the trap tonight." I sat down and pulled a pen from my pocket. "Let us execute the maneuver," I said. "Here's the beauty of the law. Derek had used a forged power of attorney to declare me incompetent and take out a $3 million commercial mortgage against my house. But because he did it fraudulently, the house was technically still under my legal ownership. A local judge had approved his guardianship based on fake medical records, but a federal mandate supersedes local jurisdiction. By physically standing in a federal building, proving my cognitive competence to a federal judge, I immediately invalidated Derek's fraudulent guardianship. But I was not just reclaiming my property, I was turning it into a weapon. I looked at the documents. It was a voluntary asset seizure and donation agreement. As a former senior auditor, I knew exactly how to trigger an immediate, undeniable federal lien. I had spent the last 48 hours mathematically fabricating a massive complex tax evasion debt under my own name, listing Derek as my primary financial manager and co-conspirator. I signed my name on the dotted line. With that single stroke of a pen, I legally surrendered my house, my empty trust fund accounts, and my entire estate directly to the United States Treasury Department to offset the phantom tax debt. The implications were utterly devastating for my son. The moment I signed that paper, my house became federal property. The $3 million commercial loan that Derek had taken out to fund Chloe's fake tech company was now backed by an asset owned by the U.S. government. By default, Derek had just committed federal bank fraud, defrauded the United States Treasury, and secured a loan using stolen government collateral. It was a Category 1 financial felony. It carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. The magistrate judge stamped the document and signed his name. "It is done," Calvin the judge said softly. "The house is ours. The accounts are frozen under federal seal. If your son tries to move a single dollar of that loan money tonight, he is moving stolen government funds." I stood up from the table. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for the past year was gone. My wife was murdered in her bed. My son had sold his soul for a payout. I had lost my home, my savings, and my family. But I had gained absolute terrifying leverage. I walked out of the federal building and stepped back into the cold Chicago air. The sun was beginning to set over the city skyline. Somewhere across town in a luxurious 5-star hotel, Chloe and Derek were drinking champagne, shaking hands with wealthy investors, and celebrating their impending escape to Dubai. They thought the old man was rotting in a padded cell. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the Grand Plaza Hotel. It was time to crash the party. It was time for the final audit. A year after my wife Vivian passed away, I finally found the courage to open her old bedroom. I hired a repairman to fix what I thought was a simple hidden water leak behind the drywall. I was just pulling into the church parking lot when my phone rang. The repairman sounded terrified. His voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand him. He said, "Cal, go home right now, but go alone. Do not tell your son. Do not tell your daughter-in-law. Just get here." When I walked back into that room and saw what was waiting for me behind the plaster, I realized my entire life was a lie. My name is Calvin. I am 71 years old, and for 35 years I worked as a forensic auditor for the IRS in Chicago. I spent my life hunting down hidden assets, exposing frauds, and breaking down complex lies. But I never realized the biggest fraud of all was living under my own roof. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my own family piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe the truth always comes to light no matter how deep you bury it. The Grand Plaza Hotel was a towering monument of glass and steel in the heart of downtown Chicago. Tonight it was the epicenter of corporate greed. I stood in the damp, dimly lit service alley behind the hotel, shivering slightly in the cold night air. I was not alone. Trey was standing next to his battered plumbing van, and leaning against the brick wall was Liam. The kid looked exhausted, pale, and terrified. But he had done exactly what I asked. Liam handed me a plastic security badge. He told me Chloe was so frantic about the server breach that she completely forgot to revoke his physical building access. The badge was active. Liam also handed me a folded piece of paper. It was the technical floor plan of the grand ballroom. He explained that the audio and visual control room was located on a small mezzanine level suspended right above the main stage. That was the nervous system of the entire gala. Whoever controlled that room controlled the massive LED screens and the sound system for the entire event. Trey tossed me a bundle of dark gray fabric. It was a standard hotel maintenance uniform. I stripped off my windbreaker and stepped into the heavy canvas coveralls. I pulled a faded blue baseball cap down low over my eyes. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a 71-year-old man, weathered and scarred from decades of hard work. I fit the part perfectly. To the billionaires and tech investors drinking champagne upstairs, a man in a gray maintenance uniform was completely invisible. I was a ghost. We moved into the hotel through the underground loading dock. Liam swiped his badge at the service elevator. The light blinked green and the heavy metal doors slid open. I told Liam his part of the mission was over. I told him to get back in Trey's van and wait for the federal agents to secure the building. But Trey shook his head. He grabbed a rolling trash cart from a utility closet and told me he was coming with me. He said Vivian baked him pies when his family had nothing, and he was not going to let me walk into a lion den alone. I did not argue. An auditor knows when to accept a valuable asset. We took the service elevator up to the ballroom level. When the doors opened, the contrast was staggering. The service corridor was concrete and fluorescent lights, but through the swinging double doors at the end of the hall, I could hear the muffled sounds of a string quartet and the steady hum of hundreds of wealthy people talking. Trey and I pushed the heavy plastic trash cart down the corridor. I stopped by the crack of the swinging doors and looked out into the main hall. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters in white jackets circulated with trays of expensive champagne and caviar. And right in the center of it all was my family. Chloe was wearing a stunning black evening gown. She was smiling, laughing, holding a glass of champagne and shaking hands with an older man I recognized as a prominent venture capitalist. Derek was standing right beside her in his tailored tuxedo. He looked arrogant, powerful, and completely at ease. They were celebrating. They believed the transport van had locked me in a padded cell hours ago. They believed they had outsmarted the system, murdered my wife, stolen my house, and secured their $10 million payday. They were toasting to their own genius. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. The anger was there, but I pushed it down. Anger makes you sloppy. Precision gets the job done. I checked the floor plan Liam gave me. The access door to the mezzanine stairs was located at the end of a long hallway right past the VIP restrooms. I told Trey to hold position by the catering doors. I gripped the handle of my mop bucket, kept my head down, and pushed it into the carpeted hallway leading to the restrooms. The hallway was quiet. I was 10 feet away from the stairwell door. My hand was reaching into my pocket to grab my lock-picking tools. Then the heavy wooden doors of the main ballroom swung open behind me. I heard Derek's voice. He was talking loudly on his cell phone. He told whoever was on the other end to make sure the Dubai routing numbers were primed and ready to receive a massive wire transfer by midnight. His heavy footsteps were coming fast down the hallway. He was heading straight for the restroom. I was trapped. I could not turn around and I could not outrun him to the stairwell. I had only one choice. I pushed the mop bucket forward and pushed open the door to the men's restroom, stepping inside just seconds before he reached me. The restroom was massive, lined with marble sinks and gold mirrors. I moved to the furthest sink in the corner, grabbed my mop and started pushing it rhythmically across the pristine tile floor. I pulled the brim of my baseball cap down so far it almost touched my nose. I hunched my shoulders and tried to make myself look as small and insignificant as possible. The door swung open. Derek walked in. He was still on the phone. He sounded irritated. He said he did not care about the transfer fees, he just wanted the money offshore the second Chloe finished her presentation. He walked over to the row of sinks. He stopped at the sink right next to where I was mopping. He was less than 3 feet away from me. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. My heart slammed against my ribs like a sledgehammer. My grip on the wooden mop handle was so tight my knuckles turned white. If he looked down, if he paid attention for just 1 second to the old black man cleaning the floor next to him, the entire operation would collapse. He would call his security team, they would drag me out the back door, and Marcus Vance would never get his live money laundering evidence. Derek put his phone on the marble counter and turned on the gold faucet. He splashed water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. He adjusted his bow tie. He was looking right at the mirror, and the mirror reflected the entire room. I kept mopping the same square of tile over and over. I did not look up. I breathed through my mouth to keep silent. Derek narrowed his eyes. He stopped adjusting his tie. His gaze shifted in the mirror, focusing on the reflection of the janitor standing behind him. He tilted his head slightly. He opened his mouth to speak. He was putting the pieces together. Before the first word could leave his lips, a catastrophic, deafening crash echoed from the hallway outside. It sounded like a bomb going off in a glass factory. The sound of 1,000 shattering wine glasses and twisting metal ripped through the quiet corridor, followed immediately by the screams of the catering staff and the angry shouting of the hotel management. Derek jumped, startled by the massive noise. He cursed loudly, snatched his phone off the marble counter, and stormed out of the restroom to see what had happened, completely forgetting about the janitor in the mirror. I let out a shaky breath. Trey had delivered. My loyal friend had just rammed his heavy plastic trash cart directly into a massive display pyramid of expensive champagne glasses right outside the ballroom doors. He had created the perfect chaos. I did not waste a single second. I dropped the mop, slipped out of the restroom, and blended into the confusion in the hallway. Security guards and waiters were running toward the shattered glass. Derek was yelling at a hotel manager. Nobody was looking at the stairwell door. I walked swiftly to the access door. I pulled the flathead screwdriver from my pocket, wedged it into the simple hotel tumbler lock, and twisted hard. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open, slipped into the dark stairwell, and climbed the concrete steps as fast as I could. I reached the top of the stairs and stood in front of the heavy metal door marked audio-visual control. I had infiltrated the fortress. I was in position. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold plastic of the black USB drive. My son and his wife were down below, smiling for the cameras, waiting to collect their stolen millions. They thought they were the directors of this show, but they were about to realize the auditor was finally sitting in the control room. A year after my wife Vivian passed away, I finally found the courage to open her old bedroom. I hired a repairman to fix what I thought was a simple hidden water leak behind the drywall. I was just pulling into the church parking lot when my phone rang. The repairman sounded terrified. His voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand him. He said, "Cal, go home right now, but go alone. Do not tell your son. Do not tell your daughter-in-law. Just get here." When I walked back into that room and saw what was waiting for me behind the plaster, I realized my entire life was a lie. My name is Calvin. I am 71 years old, and for 35 years I worked as a forensic auditor for the IRS in Chicago. I spent my life hunting down hidden assets, exposing frauds, and breaking down complex lies. But I never realized the biggest fraud of all was living under my own roof. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my own family piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe the truth always comes to light, no matter how deep you bury it. The heavy metal door of the audio-visual control room clicked shut behind me. I turned the deadbolt, sealing us inside. The room was dark, bathed only in the blue and green glow of dozens of high-end monitors and sound mixing boards. Through the massive tinted glass window that spanned the front wall, I had a perfect godlike view of the grand ballroom below. Was eating a slice of pizza, staring at a laptop screen. He did not even hear me come in. I stepped forward into the glow of the monitors. I reached out and tapped him firmly on the shoulder. The young man jumped, nearly choking on his food. He spun his chair around, his eyes wide. He looked at me, taking in my faded baseball cap and my gray maintenance coveralls. He frowned, his initial shock turning into annoyance. He told me I was not supposed to be up there. He said this was a restricted technical area and ordered me to leave before he called security. I did not move. I reached into the deep pocket of my coveralls. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. It was the remaining $5,000 from the stash I had hidden in my laundry room. I tossed the stack onto the mixing console right next to his half-eaten pizza. The technician stared at the money, completely confused. He asked me what this was about. I took off my baseball cap and looked down at him. My voice was calm, deep, and completely devoid of any emotion. I told him his name was Jason. I told him he was the lead independent IT contractor for Orchestrating. I told him he built the secure server architecture for Chloe and Derek, and that he personally maintained the firewall that my associate had to breach just a few hours ago. Jason went completely pale. He tried to stand up, but I put my heavy hand on his shoulder and forced him back into the chair. I told him I was a retired senior criminal investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. I explained that Orchestrating was a $12 million Ponzi scheme. I told him the federal government was currently freezing every bank account associated with the company. Then I leaned in close so he could hear every single word clearly over the muffled sound of the orchestra playing below. I told Jason that because his digital signature was on the automated emails sending fake dividend reports to investors, the federal prosecutor was going to charge him as a knowing accessory to massive wire fraud. I told him the mandatory minimum sentence for his level of involvement was 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Jason started to shake. He raised his hands, his voice cracking. He swore he did not know anything about a Ponzi scheme. He said he was just hired to build a payment portal and keep the servers running. He said Chloe paid him under the table and told him not to ask questions. I looked at him with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who had interrogated hundreds of corporate criminals. I told him I believed him, but I also told him the federal judge would not care, unless he took my offer. I pointed to the stack of cash on the console. I told Jason he had exactly two choices. Option 1, he could hit the security panic button on his desk. Derek would send his armed men up here, and when the FBI raided the building in less than an hour, Jason would be arrested as a co-conspirator. Option 2, he could put the $5,000 in his pocket, walk out the back fire escape, and disappear into the night. I promised him that if he chose option 2, I would personally wipe his administrative logs from the central server before the federal agents seized the hard drives. He would be completely erased from the crime. Jason did not even hesitate. He grabbed the stack of cash, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and scrambled out of the chair. He did not say a single word. He unlocked the heavy metal door, slipped out into the stairwell, and ran down the concrete steps like his life depended on it. Because it did. I locked the deadbolt again. I was alone in the control room. I sat down in the plush leather chair facing the massive tinted window. I looked down at the ballroom. The lights were beginning to dim. The string quartet stopped playing. A hush fell over the hundreds of wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites gathered at the tables below. I took the small black USB drive out of my pocket. It felt heavy in my hand. It held the truth. It held the brutal, undeniable reality of what my son and his wife had done to the woman I loved. I plugged the drive directly into the master presentation server on the desk. The computer recognized the drive immediately. I opened the folder. I bypassed the glossy fake promotional videos Chloe had queued up for her presentation. I routed the master video feed directly to the massive 500-inch LED screens flanking the main stage. I linked the audio output to the primary surround sound amplifiers. I set the murder video to full screen. I maximized the volume levels. I paused it at the exact moment Chloe walked into my dying wife bedroom. Down below, a brilliant white spotlight hit the center of the stage. Chloe walked out from behind the velvet curtains. The crowd erupted into polite applause. She looked absolutely radiant. Her black evening gown caught the light. The diamonds around her neck sparkled. They were Vivian diamonds, the ones she stole from my safety deposit box. Derek was standing at the edge of the stage watching her with a proud, arrogant smile. He had his phone in his hand, probably waiting for the notification that the $10 million in new investor funds had successfully cleared the offshore accounts in Dubai. He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. Chloe stepped up to the crystal podium and adjusted the microphone. Her voice echoed clearly through the monitor speakers in my control room. She sounded so confident, so perfectly poised. She thanked the elite guests for coming. She talked about the vision of Orchestrating. She spun a beautiful, complex web of lies about artificial intelligence and global connectivity. But then she shifted her tone. She lowered her voice, making it sound soft and vulnerable. She was executing the emotional manipulation phase of her pitch. She told the audience that building this company had required massive personal sacrifice. She said her greatest inspiration was her beloved mother-in-law Vivian, who had tragically passed away last year after a sudden heartbreaking illness. Chloe actually forced a tear to roll down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. She reached up and elegantly wiped the fake tear away. The audience was completely silent, captivated by her emotional display. She told the crowd that watching her mother-in-law fade away made her realize how precious time is. She said Vivian's legacy of love and generosity was the foundation upon which Orchestrating was built. She asked the investors to honor that beautiful legacy tonight by funding her vision for the future. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. The sheer, unadulterated evil of this woman standing on a stage using the memory of the woman she murdered to steal millions of dollars was beyond anything I had ever witnessed in my career. "I would like to share a short video with you all," Chloe said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "A video that shows the true heart of our mission." She raised a small wireless presentation clicker in her hand. She pointed it toward the control room. She prepared to press the button that she thought would play her fake corporate montage. Up in the dark, isolated control room, I leaned forward. I placed my weathered, scarred index finger directly over the Enter key on the master console keyboard. "Let me help you with that presentation, Chloe," I whispered into the empty room. I pressed the key. The final audit had officially begun. I pressed the Enter key on the master console keyboard. It was a single, simple motion. My finger came down, the plastic key clicked, and the digital command was sent through the fiber optic cables of the Grand Plaza Hotel. In my 35 years working for the Internal Revenue Service, I had signed documents that froze millions of dollars. I had given orders that seized mansions and yachts. But I had never executed a command as absolute and destructive as this one. Down in the grand ballroom, the lights dimmed perfectly. The audience of billionaires, politicians, and socialites fell into a hushed, respectful silence. They turned their attention away from their expensive champagne and caviar, directing their eyes toward the massive 500-inch LED screens flanking the main stage. They were expecting a slick, highly produced corporate video about the future of artificial intelligence. They were expecting to see the brilliant vision of Aura Tech. Instead, the screens flickered and cut to a grainy, low-angle shot of a dimly lit bedroom. The image was 50 feet tall. The date stamp in the bottom corner was unmistakable. October 12th, the day my wife was murdered. A murmur of confusion rippled through the ballroom. People shifted in their seats. Some of the venture capitalists frowned, perhaps thinking this was an avant-garde emotional marketing tactic. On the stage, Chloe turned her head to look at the screen. Even from the control room high above, I could see her posture stiffen. She raised her wireless clicker and mashed the button repeatedly, trying to force the system back to her presentation. But I had locked her out. The master console overrode all remote devices. The surround sound system of the ballroom was engineered for cinematic perfection. It picked up the audio from Vivian's hidden camera and amplified it to deafening clarity. The sound of high heels clicking against hardwood floors echoed through the massive hall. The bedroom door on the giant screens swung open. Chloe walked into the frame. The entire ballroom gasped collectively. There she was, 50 feet tall, wearing a casual sweater, walking into the room of a dying woman. The audience watched as the Chloe on the screen approached the bedside table. They watched in absolute silence as she pulled a small plastic bag filled with white capsules from her pocket. The crisp, amplified click of the plastic pill organizer opening sounded like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. I leaned closer to the tinted glass of the control room. I did not want to miss a single second of their destruction. On the screen, Chloe carefully removed Vivian red heart medication and replaced it with the white capsules of poison. The crowd below began to realize what they were watching. This was not a promotional video. The silence in the room shifted from respectful attention to creeping, icy horror. Then the heavy wooden door on the screen opened again. Derek walked into the frame. He was wearing a tailored business suit, holding a leather briefcase. He stood next to Chloe, looking down at his own mother, who was pretending to be fast asleep. The microphone picked up their voices with terrifying precision. The speakers blasted their dark, twisted secret to the hundreds of elite guests. "Is it done?" the digital Derek asked, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Yes," the digital Chloe replied, tossing the real heart medication into her pocket. "She will not wake up from this batch. It is strong enough to stop a horse." Derek looked down at his mother. He did not look sad. He did not look conflicted. He looked impatient. "The sooner the old woman dies, the sooner we cash out," Derek said. His voice was cold, mechanical, and utterly devoid of humanity. "I cannot keep stalling the investors. We need her estate liquidated by the end of the month." Chloe let out a soft, cruel laugh. It was a terrible, soulless sound that sent a physical shudder through the ballroom audience. "Just go to sleep, old woman," Chloe whispered to the camera. "Derek needs the money now. You are taking up space." The video feed stopped. The image froze on Chloe's smiling face as she looked down at the woman she was murdering. For 5 agonizing seconds, the grand ballroom was completely paralyzed. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The illusion of the brilliant tech CEO and the successful fund manager shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Then the silence broke. At the VIP table directly in front of the stage, the mayor of Chicago slowly lowered his champagne flute, his face completely pale. Next to him, the lead venture capitalist, who was prepared to hand Chloe a check for $10 million, stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "My God," a woman in the front row screamed, covering her mouth with her hands. "They killed her. They actually killed her." The local news reporters who had been invited to cover a glamorous corporate launch suddenly realized they were witnessing a live, unedited murder confession. The red recording lights of the heavy television cameras pivoted violently away from the podium and pointed directly at the giant LED screens. Journalists started shouting into their microphones, their voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy of breaking news. On the stage, Chloe was completely frozen. The blood had entirely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The diamonds around her neck, the ones she had stolen from my wife, suddenly looked like a glittering noose. The wireless clicker slipped from her trembling hand. It hit the crystal podium and clattered loudly to the floor. The sharp noise seemed to snap her out of her paralysis. "Turn it off!" Chloe shrieked. Her voice was shrill, manic, and completely stripped of her polished corporate elegance. She lunged toward the edge of the stage, waving her arms frantically at the control room window. "Turn that screen off right now. It is a lie. It is a deep fake. Somebody turn it off." She sounded ridiculous. She was a murderer standing in a black evening gown, screaming at a 50-foot-tall image of herself committing the crime. Nobody believed her. The raw, unfiltered reality of the hidden camera footage was undeniable. The crowd was backing away from the stage as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Derek was standing near the velvet curtains. The arrogant, powerful executive had completely crumbled. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked up at the tinted glass of the audio-visual control room. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew Jason the technician would never have played that video. He knew someone else was up there. Derek pulled his cell phone from his tuxedo pocket. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He screamed into the receiver, "Get up there! Get up to the control room right now! Break down the door! Break the glass! I do not care what you have to do. Get whoever is in that room!" He was yelling for his private security team. The thugs in the dark suits who had kidnapped me from the law office. They were stationed at the ballroom exits, but now they were shoving their way through the panicked crowd running toward the stairwell access door. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Guests were rushing toward the exit doors, pushing past each other to get away from the murderers on stage. Waiters dropped their trays, sending expensive champagne and caviar crashing to the carpet. The string quartet players grabbed their instruments and fled behind the curtains. It was a public execution. I had not fired a single bullet. I had not thrown a single punch. But I had completely and utterly destroyed their lives. I had taken their reputation, their freedom, and their fraudulent empire, and I had burned it to ashes in front of the entire world. I sat in the plush leather chair in the control room watching the security guards sprinting up the concrete stairs through the security camera feeds on the monitors. They were coming for me. They were going to try to break down the heavy metal door. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound, absolute sense of peace. The audit was complete. The ledger of their sins was finally balanced. Vivian had given me the weapon, and I had used it to deliver a fatal blow. I stood up from the console. I reached into my pocket and pulled off the faded blue baseball cap. I unzipped the gray maintenance coveralls and let them drop to the floor. Underneath the dirty janitor uniform, I was wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. I adjusted my tie. I picked up my wooden walking cane. Derek wanted to send his goons to break down the door. He did not realize I was already planning to open it. It was time for the ghost to step out of the shadows. It was time for the father to look his son in the eyes one last time. I unlocked the heavy metal door of the audio-visual control room and stepped out into the cold concrete stairwell. I could hear the heavy boots of Derek and his private security team pounding up the steps from the floor below. They were rushing, fueled by panic and adrenaline, desperate to find whoever had hijacked their presentation. I did not run. I did not try to hide in the shadows. I simply walked down the stairs leaning on my wooden cane. The sharp lines of my tailored black suit caught the dim emergency lights. When I met the three massive men on the landing, they froze. They were looking for a frail old man in a dirty gray maintenance uniform, or maybe a rogue computer technician. They were certainly not looking for a distinguished gentleman in a high-end suit descending the stairs with absolute authority. I looked right at the lead security guard and pointed my cane up toward the control room. "The door is open," I told him, projecting the confident voice of a wealthy investor. "The man you are looking for just went through the roof access hatch." The guards did not even question me. They pushed past me, their heavy boots echoing loudly as they charged up the remaining flights of stairs, completely ignoring the 71-year-old ghost walking right through their perimeter. The arrogance of corrupt men is always their greatest vulnerability. They only see what they expect to see. I reached the ground floor and pushed through the heavy fire exit doors into the backstage area of the grand ballroom. The space behind the velvet curtains was absolute pandemonium. Catering staff were running in every direction, dropping trays of expensive food. Event coordinators were screaming into their radios, trying to figure out how a murder confession was playing on their massive LED screens. Nobody paid any attention to me. I was just another face in a sea of panic. I paused for a moment in the shadows just behind the heavy velvet drapes that separated the backstage area from the main stage. I closed my eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. I thought about Vivian. I thought about the way her laugh used to fill our living room. I thought about the quiet moments we shared on the porch after a long day. She had hidden that camera because she knew the evil growing inside our own home. She had endured the poison knowing it would eventually give me the ammunition to strike them down. She was the bravest woman I ever knew. I opened my eyes. It was time to finish what she started. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains and walked directly onto the main stage. The grand ballroom was in a state of absolute shock. Hundreds of people were standing up, pointing at the 50-foot screen behind me, whispering in horrified tones. The giant image was still frozen on Chloe and her cruel, smiling face as she stood over my dying wife. The glaring white spotlight that had been illuminating the crystal podium now cut through the dim room, highlighting my arrival. I walked slowly across the polished wooden floor of the stage. My wooden cane tapped a steady rhythmic beat that somehow cut through the chaotic noise of the room. Tap, tap, tap. Derek was the first to see me. He was standing near the edge of the stage, still clutching his cell phone, screaming at someone on the other end. His eyes darted toward the sound of my cane. The moment he registered my face, the phone slipped from his hand and shattered against the hard floor. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified child. He stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing in silent, absolute horror. He thought I was strapped to a bed in a psychiatric ward miles away, drugged out of my mind. He thought he had erased my existence. And yet here I was, standing in the center of his $10 million gala, wearing a suit sharper than his own. I walked over to the crystal podium. The wireless microphone was lying on the floor where Chloe had dropped it. I bent down, picked it up, and blew into it. A sharp thump echoed through the massive surround sound system, immediately silencing the entire ballroom. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward me. The local news cameras pivoted instantly, focusing their bright lenses directly on my face. I looked down at Derek. I looked at Chloe, who was trembling violently, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it almost looked theatrical. I brought the microphone to my lips. "Hello, son," I said. My voice was deep, calm, and amplified perfectly across the massive hall. The food at the nursing home was terrible today, so I decided to come here instead. The collective gasp from the audience was loud enough to shake the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The venture capitalists, the politicians, the media reporters, they all stared at me. They recognized my face from the horrible video still frozen on the screen behind me. They realized they were looking at the husband of the murdered woman. They realized they were looking at the father of the murderer. "You look surprised to see me, Derek," I continued, my voice echoing with unrelenting authority. "Did you really think you could forge a medical decree, steal my life savings, mortgage my house, and lock me in a basement without me doing a little auditing of my own?" Derek could not speak. His legs gave out completely and he fell to his knees right there on the ballroom floor. The powerful investment fund manager was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating mess. He knew it was over. He knew the entire world had just watched him sanction the death of his own mother for a payout. But Chloe was different. Chloe was a narcissist who had built her entire life on manipulation and lies. When a narcissist is backed into a corner, they do not surrender or show remorse. They attack. She snapped out of her paralyzed state, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her diamond necklace glittering under the stage lights. "Do not listen to him," Chloe shrieked into the crowd. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and echoing wildly without a microphone. "He is crazy. He has severe schizophrenia. He has advanced dementia. My husband and I have the medical records to prove it." She turned to the audience, pleading with the wealthy investors who were already backing away from her in disgust. "He is a sick, delusional old man," she cried out, waving her arms. "He forged that video. It is a deep fake. It is artificial intelligence. He hates me because I am successful and he is nothing. He made the whole thing up to destroy my company." The crowd just stared at her. Nobody was buying the desperate lies of a woman caught red-handed on a 50-foot screen. The video was too raw, too real. The audio of her calling my wife an old woman taking up space was burned into their memories. But Chloe refused to stop. She turned her frantic eyes toward the back of the ballroom where the official hotel security guards were standing bewildered by the chaos. "Arrest him!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing directly at my chest. "Arrest him right now. He is a violent psychiatric patient. He broke out of a mental ward. He is dangerous. Get him off my stage." 4 large men in hotel security uniforms hesitated for a moment, looking at each other in deep confusion. But Chloe was the one who rented the ballroom. She was the client paying the massive bill. They were trained to follow the orders of the event host. The guards started pushing their way through the murmuring crowd, heading straight for the stage. They were pulling out their radios and unhooking their heavy metal batons from their belts. Derek, still on his knees, finally found his voice. "Grab him!" Derek yelled to the guards, suddenly finding a shred of false hope in his wife's frantic lies. "He is legally incompetent. He is having an episode. Restrain him." The security guards reached the edge of the stage. They were climbing the short stairs, their eyes locked on me. They were coming to tackle a 71-year-old man to the ground. They were coming to silence the auditor before he could deliver the final blow. I stood perfectly still behind the crystal podium. I did not flinch. I did not back away. I looked at the men rushing toward me and I felt a cold smile spread across my face. They thought they were in charge of the room. Chloe and Derek thought they could still manipulate their way out of this trap. They had no idea the real cavalry was already waiting just outside the doors. The 4 hotel security guards closed the distance. The lead guard, a burly man with a tight buzz cut, reached his thick hand out to grab my shoulder. Chloe was still shrieking from the side of the stage, ordering them to tackle me to the ground. Derek had managed to push himself up from his knees, leaning heavily against a speaker monitor. A sick, desperate glimmer of hope flashed across his pale face. He truly believed his fabricated medical decree was a magic shield that could protect him from the consequences of murder. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still behind the crystal podium and looked past the advancing guards. I focused my gaze on the massive ornate oak doors at the very back of the grand ballroom. Before the guard could lay a single finger on my suit, a deafening crash echoed through the hall. The heavy wooden doors were violently kicked open. They slammed against the walls with the force of an explosion, shattering the quiet tension of the room. A sea of men and women in dark tactical gear flooded into the ballroom. They moved with terrifying coordinated precision. Across the backs of their armored vests were large, bold yellow letters, IRSCI, FBI. The hotel security guards immediately froze. They recognized federal authority when they saw it. The lead guard took 3 quick steps backward, raising his hands in the air, wanting absolutely nothing to do with whatever was happening. The elite crowd of investors and politicians scattered like frightened insects, pressing themselves against the walls to make way for the raid. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents secured the perimeter, locking down every exit elevator and stairwell. Walking straight down the center aisle, flanked by 2 armed agents, was Marcus Vance. He wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit beneath his tactical vest. He looked exactly the way a predator looks when it finally corners its prey. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me a single respectful nod. The cavalry had arrived. Agents swarmed the stage in seconds. They surrounded Chloe and Derek, forming a tight circle of federal authority. Chloe let out a high-pitched gasp and stumbled backward, her expensive heels catching on the carpet. She bumped into the heavy velvet curtains and slid down until she hit the floor, clutching her stolen diamond necklace, completely paralyzed by fear. But Derek reacted differently. The sight of the federal agents triggered a defensive, arrogant rage. He was a man who had spent his entire life bullying people with money and fake legal threats. He thought he could bully the United States government. Derek shoved his way past an agent and pointed a trembling finger at my chest. He was sweating profusely, his tuxedo completely ruined. He yelled that they had no right to interrupt a private corporate event. He screamed that they had no jurisdiction here. He pointed at me and told the agents that I was a severe psychiatric patient who had escaped from a medical transport. Marcus Vance stepped up onto the stage. He stood between me and my son. He looked at Derek with absolute zero emotion. He informed Derek that the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were currently executing federal search and seizure warrants for every asset tied to Orchestrating. Derek completely lost his mind. His face turned bright red. He shouted that he was my legal guardian. He screamed that he held a durable power of attorney. He yelled for the entire room to hear that he was the sole owner of my house, my trust fund, and every single asset I had ever possessed. He demanded that the agents arrest me for corporate sabotage and trespassing. He was so deeply entrenched in his own lies that he genuinely believed a forged piece of paper could stop a federal task force. I stepped out from behind the crystal podium. I walked slowly toward my son. The armed agents parted slightly to let me through. I stopped just 3 feet away from the boy I had raised. I reached into the inside breast pocket of my tailored black suit. I pulled out the crisp white document I had signed earlier that morning at the Dirksen Federal Building. I unfolded it slowly, making sure the official red seal of the federal magistrate was clearly visible under the bright stage lights. I looked Derek directly in the eyes. I let a cold, calculated smile spread across my face. "Did you forget where I used to work, Derek?" I said. My voice was low, steady, and amplified perfectly by the acoustics of the silent ballroom. "You spent your whole life thinking I was just a tired old man pushing papers at a desk. You forgot that I spent 35 years hunting down the smartest, most ruthless financial criminals in this country." Derek stared at the paper in my hand. He blinked rapidly, confusion and panic warring on his face. He asked what that paper was. I held the document up so the federal agents and the surrounding cameras could see it. I told him it was a voluntary asset seizure and donation agreement. I explained that when I walked into the federal building this morning and proved my cognitive competence to a federal judge, his forged medical guardianship was immediately rendered null and void. Derek swallowed hard, shaking his head in denial. He said the house was his collateral. He said the $3 million loan was legally binding. I stepped even closer. I told him he was right about the loan, but he was completely wrong about the collateral. I explained that by signing this document, I had legally surrendered my home and my entire estate directly to the United States Treasury Department to offset a phantom tax debt I created specifically for him. The blood drained from Derek's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth fell open. He finally understood the trap. I did not stop. I wanted to make sure he heard every single detail of his destruction. I told him that the house and all the accounts he thought he controlled were currently federal seized property. I told him that when he stopped making payments on that massive commercial loan and allowed the bank to foreclose, he was no longer defaulting on a private asset. You just used United States government property as collateral for a high-interest corporate loan, I told him, my voice ringing with finality. You defrauded the federal treasury to fund a $12 million Ponzi scheme. Marcus Vance stepped forward and put his hand heavily on Derek's shoulder. Marcus finished the audit for me. He told Derek that leveraging stolen federal assets constituted first-degree federal bank fraud. He told him it carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary, and that was before they even started talking about the murder charges. Derek's knees buckled again. He did not fall to the floor this time because two massive FBI agents grabbed him by the arms and held him up. He was completely broken. The arrogant, untouchable executive had been mathematically and legally annihilated by the very man he thought he had erased. I turned my back on him. The audit was closed. The ledger was balanced. I had used their own greed to build a cage they could never escape. Now the only thing left to watch was how quickly these two rats would turn on each other to save their own skin. The grand ballroom was suffocating under the heavy weight of federal authority. The elite guests, the venture capitalists, the politicians, they were all completely silent, backed against the walls like frightened spectators at a gladiator arena. On the stage, the reality of absolute destruction was finally sinking in for my son and his wife. I stood a few feet away, leaning on my wooden cane, watching the inevitable collapse of a criminal partnership. When you build a marriage on a foundation of stolen money and murder, there is no true loyalty. There is no unconditional love. There is only a countdown until the money runs out. And the money had just run out completely. Chloe was slumped against the heavy velvet curtains, her breathing shallow and frantic. She looked at the dozen heavily armed federal agents swarming the stage. She looked at Marcus Vance, whose face was a mask of cold stone. Then she looked at the bank of local news cameras still broadcasting live to the entire city. I watched the gears turning in her narcissistic brain. I saw the exact moment she calculated that Derek was no longer a useful asset. He was a sinking ship, and Chloe was not going to let herself drown with him. She was a survivalist, a parasite looking for a new host or a new lie to keep herself alive. She slowly pushed herself up from the floor. She smoothed out her ruined black evening gown. She forced a fresh wave of tears into her eyes, inhaling sharply to let out a loud theatrical sob. She raised her hand and pointed a trembling finger directly at my son. It was him, she screamed. Her voice echoed wildly through the silent ballroom, completely raw and unhinged. It was all him. He forced me to do it. Derek, who was barely being held up by two FBI agents, jerked his head toward his wife. His bloodshot eyes widened in absolute disbelief. He could not comprehend what was happening. He had forged medical documents for her. He had mortgaged his childhood home for her. He had sanctioned the murder of his own mother for her. And now she was offering him up to the federal government on a silver platter to save her own skin. Chloe did not stop. She stepped toward Marcus Vance, playing the part of the battered, terrified victim to perfection. "I did not want to hurt Vivian," she cried out, her voice dripping with fake anguish. "I loved her. But Derek was drowning in debt. He told me the investors were going to kill him if he did not get the capital. He gave me those pills. He told me that if I did not switch her medication, he would kill me too. I was terrified. He is a monster. I was just trying to survive. I am a victim here." The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. In the giant video still frozen on the screens above, she was smiling. She was mocking my dying wife. There was absolutely no fear in her eyes when she dropped those poison capsules into the organizer. But she was desperate, and desperate rats will eat each other to survive. Derek stared at her. The shock on his face morphed into something else entirely. It bypassed sadness. It bypassed regret. It morphed into pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. The realization that he had destroyed his entire family for a woman who would sell him out in a heartbeat broke his already shattered psyche. "You lying witch!" Derek roared. The sound tore from his throat like a wild animal. It was a guttural scream of absolute betrayal. With a sudden explosive burst of adrenaline, Derek ripped his arms free from the grip of the two federal agents holding him. He lunged across the stage. He did not care about the heavily armed FBI agents surrounding him. He did not care about the flashing cameras. He only cared about destroying the woman who had just signed his death warrant. He tackled Chloe right into the crystal podium. The heavy glass structure shattered into a dozen pieces, sending sharp shards flying across the polished wooden floor. The microphone hit the ground, sending a deafening high-pitched screech of feedback through the massive surround sound speakers. The elite crowd in the ballroom screamed and scrambled further back toward the exit doors. Chloe let out a genuine shriek of terror as they crashed to the ground. Derek landed heavily on top of her, his tailored tuxedo ripping at the seams. He wrapped both of his hands tightly around her throat. He was squeezing with all the violent fury of a man who had lost absolutely everything. "I told you to do it!" Derek screamed, spit flying from his mouth as he strangled his wife on the stage. "You wanted the money for your fake company. You said she was taking up space. You murdered her. You ruined my life." The stage erupted into total chaos. Federal agents swarmed the couple immediately. Marcus Vance shouted tactical orders over the screaming crowd. 4 heavily armored agents descended on Derek. They grabbed his shoulders, his arms, and his hair, violently prying his fingers off Chloe's neck. Derek fought back like a madman, kicking and thrashing, totally blinded by his rage. But he was a white-collar criminal in a tuxedo, and they were trained federal law enforcement. An agent swept Derek's legs out from under him. They slammed him face first into the hard wooden floor of the stage. A heavy combat boot planted itself firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him securely to the ground. The cold, sharp sound of steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the chaos. Derek was completely immobilized, his face pressed against the stage, gasping for air, his nose bleeding onto the polished wood. Chloe was coughing and sputtering beside him, rubbing her red, bruised throat. She was crying real tears now, expecting the federal agents to treat her like the victim she claimed to be. But Marcus Vance had seen the video. He knew exactly what she was. 2 female FBI agents grabbed Chloe by the arms. They hauled her up, roughly slammed her against the remaining metal base of the shattered podium, and pulled her arms behind her back. Chloe screamed that they were making a mistake, that she was forced into it, but the agents ignored her entirely. The handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. Marcus Vance stepped forward. His voice boomed over the remaining noise in the room. He read them their Miranda rights, citing federal wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Every single word he spoke was a nail in their coffins. The flashing lights of the news cameras turned the grand ballroom into a strobe-lit nightmare. Every shutter click captured their absolute humiliation. The local news stations were broadcasting the downfall of the elite CEO and the powerful investment manager live to the world. They were reduced to common criminals brawling on the floor like animals. Their corporate empire was gone. Their dignity was completely erased. They were just 2 murderers in ruined expensive clothes being paraded in handcuffs in front of the very people they tried to impress. I stood perfectly still, watching the federal agents drag them to their feet. I did not feel pity. I did not feel sorrow. I looked at Derek. His custom tuxedo was covered in dust and broken glass. He looked up at me, his eyes full of fear, defeat, and a desperate, unspoken plea for a father who was no longer there. I looked at Chloe. Her expensive makeup was smeared across her face. Mascara ran down her cheeks like black tears. The diamonds she had stolen from Vivian were tangled in her disheveled blonde hair. She looked pathetic. They had tried to throw me into a dark hole. They tried to erase my mind and bury me alive so they could dance on my grave. But I was the one standing in the light wearing a sharp suit, and they were the ones wearing the chains. The cameras kept flashing, burning their disgrace into the public record forever. The audit was finally closed and the debt had been paid in full. The aftermath of the gala was a storm of federal indictments and relentless media coverage. For weeks, the faces of my son and his wife were plastered across every news channel in the country. The brilliant tech executive and the hotshot investment manager had been unmasked as desperate, bloodthirsty frauds. But the real closure did not happen in the court of public opinion. It happened exactly 6 months later inside the cold, wood-paneled walls of a federal courtroom in downtown Chicago. I sat in the front row of the gallery wearing the same tailored black suit I wore on the night of the gala. I watched as the federal marshals led Derek and Chloe into the room. They were not wearing designer clothes or stolen diamonds anymore. They were wearing standard-issue orange prison jumpsuits. Their wrists and ankles were shackled with heavy steel chains. They did not look at each other. They were seated at separate defense tables. The toxic alliance that had murdered my wife was completely dead, replaced by a bitter mutual hatred. When the federal prosecutor called me to the witness stand, the entire courtroom fell dead silent. I walked up to the podium. I placed my right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. I did not raise my voice. I did not show anger. I simply laid out the facts with the precise mechanical accuracy of an auditor presenting a final report. I detailed the forged medical decree. I explained the mechanics of the $12 million Ponzi scheme. But the absolute final blow came when the prosecutor submitted Exhibit A, the black USB drive. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. The video Vivian had recorded played on the monitors for the judge and the jury. Seeing Chloe swap the medication, hearing Derek say his mother was taking up space, the raw cruelty of it sucked the air right out of the room. 2 jurors actually wept. The defense attorneys for Derek and Chloe had absolutely nothing. You cannot cross-examine a video recording of a murder. You cannot negotiate with a confession caught on tape. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The judge asked the defendants to stand. He looked at them with absolute disgust. He called their actions a calculated, monstrous betrayal of the most fundamental human bonds. He sentenced Derek to life in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Vivian Sterling. He sentenced Chloe to 40 years in a maximum security prison for conspiracy to commit murder, massive wire fraud, and international money laundering. Chloe collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically, begging the judge for a mercy that she never showed my dying wife. Derek did not cry. He just stood there, staring hollowly at the floor. As the guards led him away, he turned his head and looked at me one last time. I did not offer him a smile. I did not offer him forgiveness. I just stared back with cold, hard finality. He was no longer my son. He was just a closed file. With the masterminds locked in federal cages, I began the process of rebuilding the ruins they left behind. Because I had voluntarily surrendered my assets to the United States Treasury under the guise of a phantom tax debt, the federal government had absolute authority to freeze the properties and prevent the commercial bank from foreclosing. Once the fraud was completely exposed in court, Marcus Vance and his team of attorneys worked with the federal magistrate to nullify the forged power of attorney. The $3 million commercial loan Derek took out was declared legally fraudulent. The bank had to absorb the massive loss, and the deed to my house was legally restored to my name. My $1.5 million retirement trust was recovered from the frozen holding accounts and transferred safely back into my control. An auditor knows that debts must be paid and loyalty must be rewarded. I arranged a private meeting with Liam at a quiet diner downtown. The kid was still visibly shaken, but he was a free man. Because he had provided the live server data that matched my encrypted drive, the FBI granted him full unconditional immunity. He was completely cleared of any involvement in the Ponzi scheme. I slid a heavy envelope across the table to him. Inside was a cashier check for $100,000 drafted from my restored accounts. I told him it was severance pay for his nightmare and a seed fund to start a legitimate life. I also gave him a signed letter of recommendation to a very prestigious ethical accounting firm run by an old friend of mine. Liam broke down in tears, thanking me over and over. I told him to just be a good man, and I walked away. Next, I visited Trey. He was working under the hood of his plumbing van when I pulled up. I handed him an envelope containing the clear, unencumbered deed to a commercial warehouse he had been wanting to buy for his business for 5 years. I paid for it in full. I told him that Vivian would have wanted the man who helped expose her killers to have a place to build his future. Trey hugged me, a strong, silent embrace between two men who understood the heavy price of truth. With the external world finally balanced, it was time to balance my internal world. I drove back to the quiet suburban street. I pulled into the driveway. The heavy, oppressive energy that had choked this property for the past year was completely gone. The illegal signal jammer had been ripped off the side of the house by the FBI evidence team. The silver Mercedes was gone. The house belonged to me again. I walked through the front door. The silence inside was no longer a threat. It was a comfort. I walked straight down the hallway to the back of the house, to the room that had held so much pain and so many secrets. I stood in Vivian's old sewing room. I looked at the heavy armchair I had pushed against the wall to hide the smashed drywall. I moved the chair aside. The jagged hole exposing the dark cavity between the wooden studs was still there. I went out to my garage and brought back a bucket of fresh plaster, a trowel, and a new sheet of drywall. I did not hire a contractor. I needed to do this myself. I cut the drywall to size. I fit it perfectly into the broken space. I mixed the plaster and carefully, methodically smoothed it over the seams. I worked in total silence, feeling the rough texture of the tools in my old hands. With every stroke of the trowel, I felt a heavy layer of grief lifting off my chest. I was sealing the wound. I was closing the breach. When the wall was perfectly smooth, I washed my hands and sat down in Vivian's favorite reading chair. I looked out the window at the setting sun, casting long golden shadows across the backyard. The house was empty. The house was quiet. But it was not the lonely, terrifying silence of a prison. It was the deep, resonant silence of a hard-won victory. I had faced the ultimate betrayal. I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and I had burned the wolves who tried to hunt me. The audit was finally finished. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the Chicago sky in deep, bruised shades of orange and purple. I sat on the wooden porch of my home. It was the same porch where Vivian and I used to sit every evening for 30 years. I held a ceramic mug of warm chamomile tea in my hands. The heat radiated through the thick ceramic, soothing the dull ache in my old joints. The evening air was crisp and carried the faint scent of approaching autumn, but I did not feel cold anymore. For the first time in over a year, the heavy, suffocating blanket of dread had been lifted completely from my shoulders. The house behind me was quiet. It was a profound, healing silence. I took a slow sip of my tea and looked back at the solid oak front door. Just months ago, this property was a battlefield. It was a prison where my own son and his wife tried to bury me alive. They had filled these halls with toxic whispers, fake smiles, and murderous greed. They looked at the hardwood floors I laid by hand and saw only dollar signs. They looked at the walls Vivian painted with so much care and saw only collateral for their fraudulent empire. But now all of that was gone. The federal agents had swept through. The lawyers had filed their final paperwork. The bank had retreated. I had scrubbed every inch of their lingering presence from this home. The expensive soulless furniture Chloe bought with my stolen money was donated to a local charity. The electronic locks were ripped out and replaced with solid brass deadbolts. The house belonged to us again. To me and to the memory of my brave wife. I looked out at the old maple tree in the center of the front yard. Vivian planted that tree when we first moved into this neighborhood. She was so young and full of hope back then. She said she wanted something with deep roots to watch over our family as we grew old. I realized now, sitting in the twilight, that she was the deepest root of all. She knew she was dying. She felt the poison working its way through her veins. And instead of panicking, instead of confronting a monster she knew she could not physically defeat, in her weakened state she gathered the evidence. She built the foundation of the trap that would eventually save my life. She put her absolute faith in me, trusting that my auditor mind would eventually find the breadcrumbs she left behind in the dark cavity of that wall. I raised my warm mug toward the maple tree in a silent, solitary toast. "You can rest now, my love," I whispered into the evening breeze. "The wolves have been cast out. The door is locked tight. Your home is safe." Thinking about Derek no longer brings a sharp stabbing pain to my chest. That wound had finally scarred over, leaving behind a numb, smooth surface. When you hold a newborn baby in your arms, you never imagine a day will come when that child will look at you and see nothing but an obstacle to a financial payout. I paid for his education. I bought his first car. I taught him how to tie a Windsor knot and how to look a man in the eye when shaking his hand. But somewhere along the line, the values of hard work and integrity were replaced by an insatiable, blinding hunger for status and unearned wealth. He chose his path. He chose to look at the mother who loved him and the father who protected him, and he chose to trade our lives for a fleeting illusion of power. I did not send my son to a federal penitentiary. He sent himself. I just provided the receipts. The ledger of his life was entirely his own making, and the final balance was zero. People at the grocery store or the local barbershop sometimes ask me how I sleep at night, knowing my only son will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. I tell them I sleep with the absolute peace of a man who did what was mathematically and morally necessary. I am 71 years old, but I am not finished living. The fire that was ignited in that dark, damp basement did not burn out after the trial concluded. It simply transformed into a steady, guiding light. I have partnered with Marcus Vance and a few other retired federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. We consult quietly for legal advocacy groups that protect vulnerable seniors from financial exploitation and family abuse. We use our decades of forensic auditing experience to track down the hidden assets of cowardly children who think they can steal from the elderly without consequence. I am no longer just a retired tax investigator. I am a shield for those who cannot fight for themselves. And I am not alone anymore. Trey still comes by every few weeks. He parks his plumbing van in the driveway and we sit on this very porch and drink a cold beer. He tells me about his business expanding, about the new commercial warehouse he bought using the funds I secured for him. Liam sends me a long email every month from his new accounting firm downtown. He is thriving, doing honest work, and finally sleeping soundly without the threat of federal prison hanging over his head. They are good, decent men. They prove to me that family is not just about the blood you share. It is about the people who stand by your side when the world turns dark. As the final light of the sun vanished behind the Chicago skyline, I finished the last drop of my tea. The streetlights flickered on, casting a warm yellow glow over the quiet suburban road. The stars began to appear in the clear night sky, bright and entirely unbothered by the chaos of the world below. I thought about the journey that brought me to this exact moment of tranquility. I thought about the harsh, unforgiving lessons learned in the darkest corners of human greed. Grief is often mistaken for weakness, and silence is too frequently misinterpreted as ignorance. When you invite greed into your home, you don't just betray your family. You dismantle your own foundation. True power doesn't need to scream its presence or flash its wealth. It sits quietly in the corner, observing, gathering facts, and waiting for the precise moment to strike. Never underestimate a person who has nothing left to lose but their dignity, because they will fight with a cold, calculated precision that no amount of stolen money can defeat. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Did you enjoy my story? I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you would have done in my position in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video to help others who might be facing a similar battle in the shadows. Remember to always trust your instincts and never let anyone steal your dignity. I will see you in the next story.